Good morning. Today is Saturday, August 3rd, 2024, and the board retreat is now called to order. It is currently 8:07. All board members are in attendance. Hi, Danielle. Chrissy Hudson is online. Is that correct? No, she's not? Okay, all board members are in attendance except for Maria, Pressy, and Chrissy Hudson. And we welcome you, Danielle, to our meeting this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Are you doing the land acknowledgement? At this time, Chair Guzman Ortiz will read the land acknowledgement.
Good morning, everyone. We're gathered today on the land of the Kalapuya, who are represented by the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. The relationship between the Kalapuya people and this land continues unbroken to this day, and we offer gratitude for the land and for the generations present and past who have stewarded the land since time immemorial. We respectfully acknowledge and honor past, present, and future Native American and Indigenous students and staff of Salem-Keizer Public Schools. We invite you to join us in honoring these ancestral grounds and celebrating the resilience and strength of all Native American and Indigenous people.
Thank you. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, we are doing a breakfast and a group activity. Today, we're going to get to know more about you. I'm going to ask each one of you to get your item ready and be able to tell us why you chose that item and why it's so significant to you. I will start with Olga.
Okay. Okay. Mine, can you hear me? Okay. Mine is a coffee mug, but it has a story, so I'll tell you why this is important to me. First of all, I'm from Colombia, and in Colombia, there's a ritual around coffee. We feel very proud about the coffee that we produce and the quality of coffee that we produce in the mornings. Families gather around to prepare the coffee. We grind it. And so I've grown up with that, and I do that in my home here. And so we spend time in the mornings doing that here and then sitting around the table and just enjoying a good cup of coffee. But also this mug is important because it reminds me of the incredible family that I have. I talk to my parents almost every day, usually when I'm driving to and from places. And one day I tell my mom, we're just having the conversation. And then I just said, my lid for the coffee mug just broke. And then we keep talking about the things and all of that. And then the next morning or the next day, I get an Amazon delivery with a new coffee mug from my brother who lives in Texas. Aww. And so I didn't need one more. I have lots of them. but it's just the thought and the care that I come from, just a family that does those things for each other because we care deeply about each other and because we just like having fun together. So that's my item for today and a little bit about me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sati, would you go next?
Well, thank you. Thank you. I just got this one yuan and a 10 rupee note. In 2017, in a hot afternoon, April, I was sitting under the tree where 2,500 years ago, the prince gave up his kingdom and became Buddha. It's in a small town called Bodh Gaya in uh, India, North India. There's a group of Chinese pilgrims were kind of going around chanting something in Chinese. I was sitting with my camera. It was very hot in the afternoon. And there were people in saffron dress who were kind of getting, showing their little bowl, and they would drop some money in their thing. So I think some of the pilgrims thought I was also sitting there for money. So somebody dropped this in my hand. I was not wearing saffron dress or anything like that. So my first thought was, who do they think I am? I'm not a panhandler here. Those are the kind of thoughts that ran through my head. Then I kept quiet and thought about it. Then I said, okay, there's no difference between me today one day and next day I could be there. And, I still stayed with that thought. And the last thought came to me was, who am I to kind of come in the way of their practice of generosity? So I carry this every day with me since 2017 in my office bag as a reminder of cultural humility is very important in not coming to a quick judgment about another community or another culture. And little did I know that this was the first step in teaching me, because when I ran for an office, as part of the campaigning, you had to stand in the street side and literally go and ask people, can you help me? Can you give me something? You had to let go all your egos, let go all your prideful thinking, and willing to ask. And to me, that was a great lesson in cultural humility. And, we can't have cultural competency or cultural proficiency without cultural humility. So that important lesson is what I learned from this 1 yuan and 10 rupee note. Thank you.
Thank you. John, are you ready?
I am ready. I brought a DVD that is falling apart with a cracked case that has been in my briefcase for a long time, and I have referenced this numerous times over the last decade plus, and the reason I carry it around is it is Articles About Change. And I think it's ironic that it is now on a DVD because I continue to collect information about this, but as somebody who has led change, who aspires to be better at change, I think it's just a fun reminder of the changes we go through, both physically and mentally. And so it was important to me to have an artifact that talked about change.
Ashley.
We're going to share a microphone here. I brought this little handy dandy sewing kit that I keep with me everywhere because I like to be prepared for all things and any emergency. So that's my article.
And I've used it.
Now I know.
All right. It's been a while since I've done show and tell, but here I am. So I brought a couple pieces of paper with me today, and it's origami. And the reason why it's personally important to me is just growing up, it was something that my grandfather did with me. So we would spend time with each other, teaching me how to fold paper very carefully and slowly, and stuff. And so it was a neat way that you can create art, right, from starting with a square piece of paper. But it's a connection for me, just family history, but also cultural heritage. From the Japanese side of my family, so I appreciate that. And I brought this, which I did not create, but one of my sons did, and it's was special to me. It kind of sits on our table. He's gone beyond me, just with the creativity here. But it's, again, something that I've been able to now pass on to him as well. So just special pieces of me.
All right. Marina?
I brought a pair of earrings. So these are little heart-shaped handcrafted earrings, and just a couple, like the story behind these earrings specifically, there's a couple layers to it, but I was on a delayed or missed flight or something on my way back from Mexico. This was several years ago, and we ended up having to stay the night in Guadalajara, which I had never visited, but it was like I remember just really wanting to get home and wanting to come back, and ended up staying, almost 24 hours there, making the best of it. So one, I think of that always, of just the opportunity to be spontaneous and make the best out of moments when sometimes you're frustrated. But it also has, it's painted, but it represents the Tenango. So my family is from Hidalgo, Mexico, and the embroidery that is local to us is Tenangos. And so it is this colorful design, which is now very popular in many places, but I remember having it as a child, like on little table pieces and whatnot. And so it has that. And lastly, it is a colibri. It's a hummingbird, which to me is a symbol of resilience and connects me to my grandmother and her words of always just saying, like, vuela, just go on and fly. So a couple little things. So these are little special earrings for me.
Very good. Superintendent Castaneda.
I do love learning these little bits about each other. So I brought this bulldog. Does anybody know what this is? No?
It's the mascot for Adam Stevens.
That's right. For my whole life, since I was little, I have been a fan of Adam Stevens. So this is the hood ornament for a Mack truck.
Oh, yeah.
And I brought this because my grandfather, so he sits in my office, and it really it feels like both a privilege and a responsibility for me to have, on both sides of my family, grandparents who only made their way through the first portions of education. And my grandfather made it through middle school. And on both sides, they raised these incredible children. And they went on to do such great things. And to me, it's like it's one generation. It's one generation of schools that changed lives. And on my grandfather's side, he left school in middle school, and he started a logging truck company. And this is the hood ornament from his first logging truck. And so he hangs out with me just as a reminder of how hard our elders worked to bring us to where we are right now.
All right. Jonathan?
All right, so this is gonna feel like I pulled it out of the car because I did. But to be fair, everything that I have right now is in my car. While we've moved here, we haven't really been able to move in yet, so a lot of my stuff is still in Tulsa. But if you know me, you'll get to know that I'm kind of a minimalist anyways. But this is one of my first purchases that I've made here in Oregon. It was the Northwest Forest Pass. I'm a huge hiker. I love to explore. And it also kind of represents to me a bit of like a new beginning and a new place to explore. And starting the journey and finding all there is to find about my new home here in Salem and Keizer and Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. And so I think this is going to travel with me for at least 1 year, because it's only good for 1 year, but for many places across the state. And so it's representative of that new journey and a path to it.
Great.
Great. That's
Lisa?
great. All right. So I have a couple pieces of art here. These are on pieces of wood. And many years ago, this one is dated actually 2012. This one might have been a little bit earlier. This is a Cruson painting. This is probably as big of a Cruson painting as I will ever get. And he's an artist who is from around here. He's amazing. But this sort of represents for me my journey into being really connected and committed to our community, and specifically education and art. It was actually I got to know an artist here, Mary Lou Zeke, and she connected me in with the Salem-Keizer Education Foundation, where I spent many years on the board and doing all kinds of things like the Awesome 3000 for many, many, many years. And just being really connected and committed to our community, which has led into some things that I've done for the school district as well. And now being here, it sort of like ties it all together. there. I also continue to be involved with the Salem Art Association and doing a lot of things there. So for me, it's sort of this culmination of bringing together two passion points around art and education. So.
Thank you. Bob?
Okay, so mine is a Stanley number 4 hand plane. Actually manufactured in 1910. It's the oldest tool that I have. My wife would say I'm a tool collector. I say that you need the right tool for the job. And there's a lot of jobs that she asked me to do. So what I like about these, it's one of many that I have. And for these, I do collect them to restore them. And there's just something about, the imagination of what this helped create over the last 120 years. How many houses did it build or fine furniture did it help create? So that just connects with me. I like working with my hands on projects as well, and it just goes back to a different period of time that I appreciate.
Ashley?
So I brought this egg shaker. It also reminds me of like past times in my life, but music is a big part of my life. I grew up performing, and then was in music education was huge for me, and even in college that was my degree. And I also, this egg was not from my classical training, as opera and classical music, but I was in a rock band at the same time, and some of you know that. But so it was kind of this weird dichotomy in my personality of doing like formal performance and then really fun and wild performance. So I never would have thought that then fast forward 25 years that I'd be serving on a school board and in a place where music is like our, shiny star for our district. And it's just every time I go to any performance, from grade school to our high schools, I'm just blown away. And I know music education sets a foundation for people to do really whatever they want in life. And it builds that connection and that sense of belonging. And I don't really do any music right now, but this stays in my desk kind of as a reminder, like, someday I'm gonna get back to that.
Thank you. Danielle, are you sharing with us this morning?
Yes, although my item is not nearly as profound. I think I'm going to say that I've done a lot of packing, and that's why mine is less profound. But I did bring an item this morning. I don't know. Hold on, I gotta unblur so you guys can see this. So this is a little turtle. I picked him up years ago at the end of a trip to Jamaica. And it's not significant in the ways of like, I saw turtles and swam with turtles or saved the turtles. No, I just liked the turtle. But I picked it up because I wanted it as something that would be a reminder to me to travel to different places. And so it has moved with me to several different places. And I chose it today because, sort of in the reverse of Jonathan, who's got the items in his car, I'm packing up my items and getting ready to move to Salem for the next part of this journey. And so as I was looking for an item among the things that are being packed, saw this and thought about the importance of really being able to be in some different places and bring those perspectives with me as I start this next step. Thank you, everyone. It's been great to hear from all of you.
Thank you. Good morning, Sophia. We're happy to have you with us this morning. Are you going to present this morning an item that you brought with you that's significant? All right.
You have to pull the mic over.
there. Sorry. Like this? Yes?
Well, I didn't see the text until right as I was leaving, and I and I was late even though I left early because I went to the completely other building and I was waiting there for a little bit. But so I'm going into my senior year of high school, and at South we have DECA, and I've been competing since I was in freshman year, and it's one of my favorite clubs and extracurriculars. And sophomore year, I didn't do great my freshman year because I hadn't actually taken a business class. But my sophomore year, I qualified for nationals, or it's really now internationals, because there was some people from other countries there, which was really cool to see. Sorry, I'm going off topic. So anyways, every club gets a pin of their state, of whatever state they're from. I actually should have pulled up the Oregon pin. And it's basically a fun thing to be trading all the pins around between like anywhere you want. And so last year, the year before last year, not many people loved the Oregon pin because it was the sign of the reindeer thing in Portland. I don't know if anyone,
Yeah.
it was that. That wasn't a big hit. What was a big hit was this one. It's a little duck. But this year we got a super cool design, which was the Jordan, because like Nike
Right. That's a good one.
from U of O. So super cool design, has a bunch of like little things on it. Some of people in our club were able to trade these for like $100 cash.
Oh my God.
Because some people who have money get desperate to trade the pins. But like me and my friend group said that we like trade pins for pins because when you bring money into it, it becomes unfair. Anyways, so in my haul for this year, I was able to get a lot more better pins, like some advisor pins or one from New York or Puerto Rico, or China, which was super cool because there weren't many students, which means the less pins there are, the more valuable it is. So the design was super cool. And basically what I'm trying to get to is that I really loved the environment. And since you're all in the same club, you know that you all have like this common thing that you can just like have to be able to start a conversation. And it's really just like this big conference like building where there's just students just approaching each other with conversation, which isn't something normally that you would see, just going up to anybody, like literally anybody, and just starting a conversation, which I don't know. It was just super. It was a super great experience, and I loved it, and I hopefully can't wait to go back.
Thank you. I'm going to stand so everybody can see my shirt.
Oh.
Oh, nice.
I moved to Salem in 1997. October of 97, I was diagnosed with fourth-stage breast cancer. I had moved here with a fourth grade son and a sixth grade son. The doctor that I went to see pretty much thought I was crazy. Because when I asked him, what are we gonna do about it? And he's like, do you understand what fourth stage breast cancer is? I said, yes. He drew me the diagram. I said, yes. He said, I'm gonna prescribe something for you because you're not acting like the typical woman that has been told she has fourth stage breast cancer. He said it one more time and I left him in his office. The next doctor I went to visit looked at me when I asked him what we were gonna do, and he said, if you were my wife or my daughter, I highly recommend a radical mastectomy. I said, schedule it. I had one in November. December, my mother died in Texas, and the doctor had told me I wasn't gonna be able to go and see her, and I asked him what army was gonna stop me. I said, you can remove the drain tube, or I'm taking it with me. They removed it. I did go and bury my mother. I even beat my sisters who live in Texas to the funeral home to make all the arrangements. January, I started chemo and radiation simultaneously. I was working at McKay at that time as an assistant principal. I'd take my chemo and I'd go right back to work and do supervision at night. I took the radiation. I was never sick. The doctor kept looking at me like, it's something different about you. I was never sick. I never lost any hair, and I never lost any weight. I can't say I was tired. It was a lot. But what this has taught me is that There will be challenges, there will be struggles. You cannot give up. You have to believe. And that's what I try to instill with the students and the staff that I work with. You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. You have to believe it, and you have to live it, and just do it. And that's what I'm doing. Thank you. All right. I'm going to turn it over to you for a minute.
Yes, thank you. Erin, oh, there we go. So one of the things that's obviously special about retreat time is that it affords you all an opportunity to, one, get to know each other and all of us better, but also just more freely discuss topics that are important because we're not working under such a strict timeline as we usually are during our board meetings. I am going to take us quickly through the goals and the outcomes for our time together today, and then we'll pause on norms. We kept the norms that seemed to work for last year, but we can talk about edits when we get to that. So our goals for today are, one, well underway, is gaining a deeper understanding of each other. Everyone around this table is such an important part of the leadership and governance team. Second, we're going to take a second lap around the sun on the board governance and specifically policy governance. We started that last year and we're going to build on that and go a little bit deeper. And specifically talk about the ways in which we can elevate student experience and student outcomes as the most important work and product of a school system. And then finally, sorry, can you go back? Finally, we're going to also take a much rosier view of revenue forecasting. We did a lot of the hard work last year, and we want to bring to you a quick view of what is and may be coming. In terms of outcomes, in accordance with your policy, we will have completed the self-assessment and talked about strength and growth areas. And we will have achieved, I hope, conceptual agreement about a proposed change in board routines that relate to regular discussions about student outcomes. And then here were the norms that we collectively established last year. Rather than read those, I'm just going to give you all a chance to look at them, and we'll pause here to see if there's anything you would like to change or add before we jump into the heart of our work. I think I'm going to take that initial silence as a signal that there are no changes or adds, correct? Okay, then we will do a quick review of our agenda. So we're on, look at how fast we're moving. We're already on number 5, agenda review. And then we're going to spend the next about hour or so, 45 minutes to an hour, going through the self-assessment results. All board members submitted the self-assessment for this year, and we've extracted some of the key points that allow you to see last year's self-assessment scores and this side by side, and spend time discussing that and what it means for you as a board. Then quick break, then we're going to talk about board monitoring, which is one of the major legs of a policy governance system. And I believe we will all together see, and we will certainly own as an executive team, the degree to which that leg needs to be strengthened in order to have a fully established and strong policy governance system. Then a quick break. Then we're going to talk about school funding, and we will be out right around noon. Okay? So for self-assessment, what I propose we do, Chair, if this is comfortable for you, is give everybody a chance to just look at the excerpts that are in this deck. This is not everything, but these are the ones that felt to us like they were most salient for discussion. We'll give you all, I would say about maybe like 3 minutes to look through these. In addition to these, if you would like to see all of the results, there's a hard copy at your desk at your seat that shows you every item. So we'll give you about 3 or 4 minutes to read through any combination of those two, and then we're just going to actually turn it over to you all for discussion about what you think you see that deserves greater attention. I'm going to do a quick time check. Do people need a few more minutes to look through the packet? No? Okay. Chair, I'm going to turn it over to you to call on people and lead the discussion through the discussion questions.
On our individual board member questions, the first one I'm going to ask you is, what did you see? Which slide, and what does the data say, and what does this mean?
So I can start with a couple of observations that I had. I think generally speaking, there was a trend in what I would say a more positive direction from last year. So I thought that that was really hopeful and really good. And I think the work that the board did last year, I guess that was last year, sort of looking at how do we want to move forward, I think did its job is what this data would tell me. And then there's some reflections. I don't know if you want to go this far yet, but a couple that I starred are on slides 11, 12, and 13. And I think a lot of, particularly 11 and 13, around listening to feedback and then also protecting having a positive image of the district. I think those are really two key pieces that I think are really in front of us as a board. When I think about the really rough year that we had this last year, and mind you, I've only been on the board since March, but we had a really tough spring. The district had a really tough spring, and so this movement into really listening to the community, listening to our students, and really, I wrote down the words around our public image, making sure that we are instilling confidence in the community, I think is some work that we need to do. And the other one that I starred is the intended and long-term benefits for students. And I think I'm really reflective on this because I had the great opportunity to be part of the summer graduation this week, which was I've found all the graduations to be inspiring. And I think this one in particular was very inspiring. And because everybody had their name read along with what they planned to do. And I think there were some that were really positive focused and some that maybe were, I would say, less, or they didn't write as much, whatever that is. But I think what I hope that we can instill in every single individual, that they matter and they will go on to do great things and that they are prepared for that. And I think that becomes sort of this underscore of our work as a board.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate our Vice Chair Lisa shared perspective. When I see this results, especially page 12, the long-term benefits, there is still a little bit of spread across scoring 2, 3, 4. And so there is still different perspectives and views that this result shows to me. So I think the question asked, at least in my mind, is how do we bring a little bit better alignment? That doesn't mean we all have to agree, but how do we bring alignment around the vision or the direction, especially the long-term? Good business, public school should be about long-term. It's almost like you won't get to sit under the tree to plant the seed today. That's the kind of thing. So short-term we managed, but long-term sustainability and long-term vision is what it comes to my mind. The second piece, even though we had the listening, compared to 2022 and 2024, see 2022 to 23, there were a lot of challenges. So, parents felt that they couldn't come and participate in person, and there was a lot of difficulty we experienced as a community. So that way, opening up the meetings to everybody to come back has shifted that, even though we still have to get them to start coming, even though the doors are open. So that's one way I would look at it. So it also speaks of the inherent, how do we kind of figure out a way, at least we can agree on the need for respecting the dignity of each and every child, and every family has a common grounds, then how do we achieve that? Is perhaps may shift the meeting next. That's my take.
Thank you. Any others?
Chair.
Yes, Sophia?
It's just a little thing, and I definitely agree with what has been said. With, sorry, I'm trying to get my thoughts in line. For like slide 12, I think it's also interesting because it seems like we have more people like on the physical board, 23 to 24, than we did 22 to 23, and so that could be one of the reasons why it's caused for a bigger spread, just because there's more people, so there's like more perspective. But it's funny, like it's a good thing, but it's just funny to me how I saw on the results for 13, like no matter everything else, all of the other data that has changed, like it's really great to see how like the integrity and like promoting a positive image has stayed the same throughout. I don't remember, like I just got on the board, so I don't remember or really was aware of what the school district was dealing with 22 to 23. I'm assuming it's some of like the COVID, like getting over that, but I obviously know what happened 23 to 24, so it's cool to see that that integrity stayed like almost exactly the same. But I just wanted to point out at slide 9, where it's like equitable student outcomes, and especially the word like allocation stood out to me, especially with all of like the budget stuff that we've been doing. And I think it comes in part with like getting people more involved, but I think that the board or just the community itself was forced to be more aware of other perspectives, especially like slide 10 showed that too, that you were forced, or not like forced, but like you had to listen to more perspective than usual, especially when it came to those big decisions. Or like slide 11, that there was just, I think there was just more voice to listen to, because maybe people weren't as involved with the decisions that the board was making until it came like specifically to the budget, then people had a lot to say. I don't know. It's just I wanted to say.
Thank you. Any others?
I will offer a reflection that isn't exactly in here, but you can feel it. The vibe is here. I think I've said this publicly. I know I've said it to you individually. It was an important and challenging year. And yesterday, John and I had a chance to present to some districts at a COSA event. And one of the things that we talked about with them was how sort of exceptional and strong this board had to be individually and then as a body to shepherd us through extremely difficult and unpopular, but also necessary decisions. And I think that in light of the challenges that you all and we all faced, the growth that Lisa mentioned is especially noteworthy, because it is this kind of pressure that very often collapses and tears apart a group. And that didn't happen to our board or to us as a larger team. The other thing that is really on my mind and many members of our team's mind is, I apologize for not being able to give you a page number, so I'm just going to tell you. In approximately the middle of the big packet, it's kind of towards the end, there's one that says, it says, How well has the board as a whole cultivated a long-range vision for education through periodic strategic planning and annual goal setting? And Satya, I think this connects back to your comment too. As we put the building blocks of this together, starting with last year's results policy, moving into what you'll hear from us today around how we really, really get serious about looking at student results publicly and regularly. The next building block is a strategic plan that lays out the strategies that we pursue over multiple years. The board has had a strategic plan. When I first joined, there was a strategic plan that, Ashley, I know you were central in developing. But now we are starting to feel the gap in our system of not having a strong and built out multi-year district strategic plan. One that the board is central to reviewing, revising, and adopting. One that helps us answer questions to our schools and school leaders like, what's happening next year? I've been meeting one-on-one with principals this summer, and I can feel their eagerness for many things, but at the top of the list, getting really focused on instruction and student results. They are just eager, excited, hungry. And it comes on the year where there were a lot of distractions, on the heels of a year of a lot of distractions. And the second thing that they are very clearly asking of me and of us, our executive team, is clarity. Please be clear about what is a priority, and then let's stick to a few priorities that are really meaningful over a long term. And so I appreciated your comments about that, Satya, because I do think it tees up a portion of this, but definitely this and next year's work.
I just want to share if that's okay. This pertains to BG2. So I see the scatter of our response is the same between 2022 and 23, 2024 results.
Number 9.
Okay, slide number 9, sorry. Slide number 9. You know, COVID was like a stress test for our community. You know, it just showed all the blocked arteries which always existed. It's not like it created anything. So the inequitable distribution of resources or outcome, etc., became even more pronounced. And literally everybody got affected by COVID and post-COVID and everything that we went through. So really the question that our policy talks about, it's a good policy, don't get me wrong, but we can't be using the old model of defining equity when every group has fallen behind. So I was just kind of thinking, how do we kind of, moving forward, how do we come up with an aspirational way of defining so that everybody can be lifted, and also resources are allocated differentially, just like they say targeted universalism or equity 2.0, so that we come up with an aspirational goal. And how do we start saying that some group may need a certain amount of resources, some will need more resources, but we cannot compromise on the outcome. Because if you take sense of belonging, which I was going through, actually some of the dominant community is actually very low. You can't be really saying, hey, now I'll kind of reach the dominant. That's like pulling down everybody down. That's not helpful for anybody. And the jobs of the future every community is aspiring in, IT industry or STEM fields, etc. So we may have to really start asking ourselves, moving forward, because our children are going to be working in areas we don't even know or imagine what exists. So how do we prepare different community to reach that point and be globally successful or nationally successful is what I was beginning to think. Say, does that require us to think differently? Because I see the same distribution, 1, 2, 3, or whatever, 1, 3, 1, perhaps that lack of clarity post-pandemic, post-crisis is making us look at the same policy different ways. And I'm saying, how do I go and tell somebody that, okay, we're going to reach that group, but that group is lower than what it should be? That doesn't make any sense to me. Am I making sense?
Yes, and I do believe that our intentional focus on student data is going to be the solution for that.
Well, one thing is the student data. For example, we know 90 to 95% school attendance is good for all children, right? Every day you miss 1 day a week, it hurts students very badly, some more than the other. So that 90-95 will be like the aspirational goal. Then start saying what kind of differential resources we need so that everybody reaches. Suppose let's say that I want to define it as a dominant community is only 65, then somebody else is 35. This reaching 65 is still less than 95. So I think somewhere we'll have to recalibrate post-pandemic because it's really pushed everybody down some far behind. What I see is the gap, educational gap, outcome gap, wealth gap, etc. has become widened. Even though everybody is pushed down, but the gap has become widened. So I'm afraid that we don't strategically recalibrate the definition and start saying, I want children from black community to be in the aeronautics industry, or to be in the data science industry, or STEM fields, just like anybody else. So that's the way I'm thinking in my head is how do we redefine considering the modern reality and then start saying, because ultimately it means closing the gap. We have more doctors from black community or engineers from different communities which have still lagging behind in population. So that's the reason I thought of how do we redefine the word considering the modern needs. Yes, please.
Thank you, that's noted. At this time, we're going to take a break, a 5-minute break. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to hear from some of our other board members at this time on the board as a whole questions.
If I may,
Yes.
these were the ones that were most exciting to me, I think, as I was reviewing them. But just overall, the spread across these is much wider, right? I think for us, and to me, what that says is like that need for clarity and that need for, you mentioned strategic planning, Andrea, and I think that is something, that we've talked about as well, and just really thinking about what's the roadmap, like where and how do we create aligned language and vision around it, like an aligned energy. And so that to me sticks out, like as I'm looking at, observance of governance policies and the fiduciary responsibilities on page 16 there, or slide 16. I'm relieved to not see 4s on here. To me, that tells me like there's energy to do better. There's a recognition that we can do better in across most of these. I think I'm always a little skeptical when we're on the achieving side. I think just that sense of having a growth mindset, I'm always thinking there's always room for growth, right? There's always room for more. And so that's what I see here. And I would want to assume that there is a desire from us to, as a board, to have more clarity, to really think about, the monitoring of progress for the district and superintendent. And I will say, it was a different year. It was the first year of our superintendent being here, and I know that kind of puts us in a different way. Like, we're not, the evaluation process is different, and it was also, with a lot of focus on RIFs and what we had to do, and I think it was the right thing to do. It was the necessary thing to do, but it also now gives us this opportunity for what comes next and how are we monitoring, how are you really thinking about progress, and if and when we find ourselves in a situation as we did this year, right? Hopefully now we'll get to financials, I guess, here soon, but that we have that clarity, because I know that at the beginning of this year, right, we did conversations with families and communities, and then we had just established our results policy, and so that became the guidance for, as what we were referring to in terms of having to do, the RIF and financials. It was like, this is what we're leaning on, but I think it would be really helpful to have like the next layer of what are we really protecting, right? Where are we really focusing, and where is it that we want to invest more?
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for, Karina, you well said, you kind of highlighted. So, I think this year it became very clear that superintendent evaluation and district evaluation, how important they are. Because in 2023, as a board, because perhaps many reasons, we didn't do a superintendent evaluation. So what I'm trying to say is, in addition to the result policy, going through each and every executive limitation and trying to see how it really affects the entire district is probably one important lesson I learned. Because, EL 7 specific and 8 specifically talks about financial challenges. You saw how it permeates across the entire district, and at every level the financial challenges was felt this year. So I think perhaps we could have prepared us, or maybe we could have educated ourselves and be better prepared. I'm not sure of the answer. But the one thing this became very clear is how important it is. And again, our policy just mentions in the first line, superintendent evaluation is district evaluation. But perhaps rewriting it in such a way that gives a little bit more clarity of the importance of how different levels of the district can be affected if we don't do due diligence towards the superintendent evaluation. It's not just one person evaluation. It's 5,000 families and lives are affected in this process, and 40,000 children and their families are affected. So it's a very important lesson I learned this year is why it is important, how we need to take that sacred duties. It's very important duty that every line is important. So that's my take home. Perhaps that's the reason we have such a large scatter, because we felt the impact of that. EL7 and EL8, executive limitation 7 and 8, and how permeating effect it had on every level. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on board as a whole questions?
I have another question. This long range vision planning, I'm not yet clear. The language is there, but it would be helpful if it is a little bit more operational so that people can say what exactly is the long-term vision. Because, we had our result policy, which definitely is an important thing, long-term growth. But tying it all together and saying, what does this vision, how do we know we get there? Even though it may be an aspirational goal, how do we measure steps towards that would be helpful. Or if there are some nationally recognized equity indicators, then we can start saying, just like, in children we get road to health card when the kids are born, at every stage families and the community can say, are we kind of getting away from their goal or are we towards that? So creating that kind of long-term thing, some kind of what I call cradle to career pipeline for all our children as part of that long-term vision would be very helpful in my opinion.
Thank you. Ashley, you have anything? Thank you.
May I add one thing? Sati, your comments just reminded me to go back and look at something that I had pulled almost exactly a year ago, July 29th, actually, which is when different parts of the policies were last revised. And so our most recent revision is the results policy, which we did about a year ago. But before that, in the BGs, if we set aside the tax exemption concurrence, I don't believe there has been a revision there since 2017. If we look at board staff linkages, there has not been a revision since 2014. If we look at the results policy, we obviously updated that for the first time since 2015, last year. And executive limitations has not been updated since 2014. And so while it is perhaps not our most urgent work, it is an important reminder that this board hasn't really had an opportunity to sit down and review whether or not these policies set the vision, the guardrails, and the goals that reflect this moment, which is a pretty different moment than 2014. A lot has happened in our community and in our nation, and perhaps we mark this as meaningful board-level future work.
Thank you. Yes.
It's just like a follow-up to that, and it's two different things. One of them, just clarification on what the policies are, like what do they do, kind of, and then also why we kind of think they haven't been updated since 2014, like why the board in all those years since 2014 has decided like not to touch it.
I can't answer the question why, but on the question of what they do, I have good news for you, which is we're gonna, when we break into our next agenda topic, we're gonna do a quick flyover of those policies and how they function together to make the board a powerful governing body. So we'll come back to your question after that flyover and see if it's holding together for you.
Thank you.
If I can add, I think on that, and Sophia, not a direct response to your question, but I think my assumption. Yeah. Okay. I think my assumptions, and just based on the last 3 years that I've been on the board, and I can see like it's, the board oversees the supervisor superintendent, right? And these policies, it's like what we're saying superintendent to do. And so I think it just like to name that there is this interesting dynamic of what the board does, what superintendent is expected to do. And so there's, I think, a tension sometimes, and I can't speak for the past necessarily, not having been a part of the board, but that there can be a tension between what the board wants in policy versus what the superintendent sees and deems like necessary and helpful, right, to lead the district. And so I think that tension, like, I just want to name that tension is there, and that, but also this last year and the work that we've done, I think, has also put us in a really good place to do the hard work, to have those candid conversations that superintendent has really, guided us and led us through, and to really put our heads down into what is necessary in policy to make sure that we are a functional board in the present, but also really thinking about that future piece. So I think, Sophia, just for that part, it is a little tricky because they're board policies for the board, but we have superintendent who is like, this is what she needs to do, and what we're gonna evaluate on, and so there's just this natural friction, I think, that comes.
Just to add to that, Chair, if I may, it has been in a crisis mode for the last 4 to 6 years. We really have to understand the context in which we are talking. And in the peacetime, it's different, but it was completely, it's like 4 or 5 back-to-back 9/11 kind of things, COVID, this, that. So it was a very dynamic process where people were in just a survival mode, a crisis mode. So, in a way, I'm glad nobody revised long-term policy based on the short-term crisis, because that's probably the number one don't do. Because that's like coming up with a long-term plan when things are all very good. So that's number one. There was also all kinds of dynamics within the board, which then it did not allow the board to really say, okay, here is a policy, this is the outcome, how do we achieve that? So that was also there, whether you want to call it emotional, political dynamics. Then there was also community hurting. Community groups were hurting. So they were looking for an immediate solving the solution for that problem for that day, rather than thinking in terms of what's a long-term sustainable outcome of this change or this policy. So I think all these factors this is the real life challenges of any policy. And then starting to see how do we implement it, that was another challenge. Then how do we monitor whether the policy led to an outcome? If it didn't, how do we drop a policy? Otherwise we'll keep adding policies after policy. So those are the factors I felt, at least in the last 4 or 5 years I've been in this, which made it hard to go touch that book.
Thank you. Yes, Ashley?
I just want to weigh in that, Sophia, since you're brand new, we updated a number of the board governance policies. We're going to go through some of them, but the ones that were just mentioned have not been updated, but we did a lot of work to update. I'm just looking at the dates, BG1 2020, BG3 2023, BG4 2023, BG7 2023. So if a policy is working, you don't necessarily need to go to it and update it every year. But a number of those were not working for our board in 22-23, and we updated all of them.
Thank you, and thank you for that work. Okay. Any other discussion on our board as a whole questions?
I think I'm probably just sort of recapping or restating some of what's already been said, but I do think this attention to this long-range plan, whether we call it a strategic plan or sort of figuring out like where are we guiding and directing is incredibly important so that we can all hang on to our appropriate parts and pieces. I'm a big fan of the governance policies because I think our role as a board is to set that framework and those guardrails and let the district then do what it is well poised to be able to do. And so then it's incumbent upon us to be able to hold ourselves accountable as well as holding the district, which is the superintendent, because we oversee the superintendent. So I really appreciate what the governance policies can do and always sort of thinking about how do we really push the envelope so that we are providing that right level of support. And I think underscore support, I think that's our job, is to support the district and to support the superintendent. So looking for opportunities for us to be able to do that in a very clear way. The second point, I think, around the governance policies is clarity with the community about the board role and the district role. I think that is, just in my short time on the board, I think it isn't clear to the public always exactly what the board job is, or the impact, or even, it becomes really muddy really quick. And I think we saw that this last spring with the challenging year that we had with the budget and with the negotiations. So I think part of that comes down to like, how do we explain this very clearly to the community, what our role is versus what the district's role is, and how they complement each other. I mean, they have to complement each other.
Chair, can I, just one more piece I noticed is moving forward, how do we bring parents and families and community to participate as we are making the policy or as we are developing the policy? Because there are three pieces. There are teachers and educators and staff, then our students, and then the families are important. All three pieces, if they can come together and find some alignment as we develop policies, then these policies are more relevant to the community and their lived experience and their aspiration and outcome they see. Essentially, it comes down to respecting their dignity, the safety of our children, having good education. Aspiration of pretty much all parents who want to see their children do better than what they have done, right? So we will be able to find some common grounds so that we don't go through what we went through. Especially when the resources are diminishing, then the groups start kind of polarized and fighting with each other over scarce. That's what I've observed. So moving forward, that would be one way to really bring different sections, different views together while we are policy making.
Sophia's going to help us with that a lot. Any other discussion?
Just one quick comment. Ashley, thank you for bringing that correction. I was working off notes that maybe were a little bit more aggregate than they should be, so I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on our board as a whole? Questions? If not, we will move on to board monitoring.
Okay, so this is the portion that Sophia actually teed up for us perfectly. Can you go one step forward? So this might look familiar to you guys a little bit from last year. This is actually the one of a set of slides that we spent actually most of our retreat on. And we'll just use this as a quick kind of overview to answer the question and also remind ourselves and have a chance to discuss how policy governance is intended to work, I think it is very true that this is extremely confusing to many of us individually, but certainly to the public. And, as a very kind of broad example, I was talking to a mayor the other day, and he was saying, the community thinks that I control everything. They call me about schools. They call me about the fire department. It is, as a member of the community, it is very difficult to know who is in charge of what and when you call for help and what they can do. So this is even a more sophisticated and micro example of this. So the way that these are intended to work together is that there are these categories in the results policy. In the board policy. So starting on that green block on the left, it's the board governance describes in policy how you all behave and relate to one another and what your role is. That gets complemented, going clockwise, with the results policy, which you passed last year. The results policy is where I would argue the board has got the most power, because it is the power to set the direction of the district. This is where you all define for us what success in Salem-Keizer looks like. Once you've defined success, it is our responsibility as a district to dedicate our time, energy, resources, and focus to achieving those goals. If you were to say the number one goal for Salem-Keizer is ergonomic seating for every student and staff member, I'm not sure we would be extremely energized, but we would do it. Ergonomic seating would happen. Last year you chose 5 results, and also in your packet in front of you, they are here. These are what, to a certain limited degree last year, but to a much more energetic degree this year, we are focusing everyone on. And in a second, Olga, I might ask you to jump in and talk about how this is working its way down through the system starting next week. So there is no lack of clarity for us, I would say, in what success looks like based on the results policy. Those are our district goals. They are easy to name, they are clear in measurement, they are annualized, there is no ambiguity. Then moving into that right box, executive limitations, it complements the results policy by saying, as you pursue these goals, these are the things you as a school district may not do in pursuit of those goals. You may not pursue them in ways that are illegal. You may not pursue them in ways that are unethical. And so you'll see, if we were to spend just time on all of those, you'll see all of the basically the rules, the you will not do it this way rules. This is where there is a certain amount of work, I think, for all of us to grow into this space. When you put the results and the limitation policies together, what you as a board are really saying is, as long as you're pursuing the goals and you're not doing it in a way that we haven't told you not to, the rest of the decisions are yours. If there is a way that you want us to pursue it or not pursue it, it needs to be captured either in the results policy or the limitations policy. But in clean policy governance, what shouldn't happen often or at all is the insertion in the middle of that space, statements about how things will be done. Now, there are, of course, lots of complexities to this that unfold over the course of any year, like you guys approve our curriculum adoption. So there are other kinds of requirements that we all face together. But that is that those three together, the way you behave, what you tell us success looks like, and the responsibility and opportunity to tell us how we may not pursue it, lays the fundamental groundwork for everything else. Then the board staff linkages describes how you interact with us as part of the board governance policy, so that one complements the green portion. Taken as a set of 4, it should be clear. It doesn't need to be comprehensive. It doesn't need to contemplate every single instance. But it should be a tight enough net that if we're behaving in accordance with all of those things, we are functioning as an excellent team in pursuit. So last year we started this first work on the results policy, and Olga, if we can just ask you to join this and talk a little bit about how you felt the results policy started to settle last year, but also very much how you're thinking as a deputy about leading those goals through schools next year.
Yes, absolutely. And how the monitoring really works in every one of the levels of our system. So let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to actually take you from the bottom up. And at the bottom of that monitoring structure is what we believe one of the most important spaces, or the most important spaces in our organization, and that is the classroom. The relationship that happens between a teacher and the students in front of her, him, them, and the learning that happens in that space is the work of all of us. That teacher starts with making instruction accessible to the student, making it also applicable to their lives, bringing in families. Dr. Chandragiri was talking about how do we get families in. This is the first and most important place where that happens, where we work on attendance, sense of belonging, all of these pieces that are part of our results policy, that are the things that we chose last year, happen in this classroom and in that relationship. And then the teacher monitors how the kids are doing, and then asks us for supports and resources. And then it's the responsibility of the next level there, the school leader, to make sure that they are creating the conditions in the school for that teaching and learning to happen, for students to feel welcome in the schools, for them to feel like they belong, for families to have voice and participation and opportunities throughout the year, for the school leader to be the advocate that comes back to curriculum department level directors and says, I need a different level of resource for this specific thing. You have asked me to focus on attendance. Here are some barriers I am seeing in the community, or with my families, or with the resources that I don't have. And then we go to that next level to help problem solve and continue to remove barriers. That principal monitors closely. If you remember, we have 9th grade on track, graduation, 3rd grade reading as 3 really important focus areas for us that we're gonna continue working on this year. We are excited, like Andrea shared, our principals are ready, our teachers are ready. They wanna come back, and they are renewed with their commitment of continuing to work and give our kids and our families what they need to make the progress that we want them to make. And so we will engage again in monitoring at the school level and at the classroom level those areas: sense of belonging, attendance, 3rd grade reading, and just early literacy. We want to make sure that our kids are readers by 3rd grade. We know that this is a very important grade that research shows makes an impact on how kids are going to do later in life, for graduation, and then after our secondary K-12 experience. They will be successful if we can have them be readers and critical thinkers in 3rd grade. Then we're going to make sure that we are monitoring and supporting our 9th graders. We know that we need them to have access to both algebra classes. That is an indicator also of successful graduation. And we want our kids to graduate, and to graduate ready for what comes next, for university, for college, for career, for whatever they pick. We want them to be successful and to contribute back to our community. So our school leaders are monitoring how we're doing on those goals, and then the person that comes, or the people that come on those strategy owner, at that strategy owner level, are level directors, curriculum directors, deputy superintendents, all of the departments that are in service of schools. Our IT department, our technology department. Do we have the right technology for students to enhance their learning. After that is the superintendent, and we will, through board leadership, through board meetings, through board work sessions, we will present to you how we are doing in those focus areas, how our kids are progressing. We'll bring those to you throughout the year. And with voices maybe from a curriculum director around an adoption that will help us get to a better outcome for ninth grade on track, or from an elementary level director that will help us get better. Oh, got it. Okay. Thank you, Erin. That will help us get better for third grade literacy. We want to come back and report and tell you how our students are doing. As you all know, we have 61 of our students that are speaking a different language than English at home, which makes us really an incredible district with amazing gifts. And we want to tell you how we're doing in helping our language learners or our multilingual learners learn in English and then in other languages. And then the board, ultimately you, who will be the recipient of the reports and who we really want to engage with in conversations on how we are doing in these most important work, teaching and learning, and what is needed, what are some of the resources, what are some of the distractions, and I'm really looking forward to that this year, that you as representatives of the community can also help us remove distractions that can keep us away from staying focused on these 5 goals that we have set for ourselves and that we have committed to bringing you progress and reports on our students doing better. I'll take any questions if you have them, or if I forgot anything, team.
One thing I want to add is that, so we did, together we talked about, and then you acted on the results policy, I think in August, maybe of last year. That was too late to get the results policy into every school's plan because their plans were already written by then. But with Olga and Ethan's leadership over the course of the year, we've managed to turn that. So this year, if you look at our schools' plans, what you'll see is that alignment. Now, is it fully mature yet? Not quite. But those are the steps of getting the pieces set up so that not just you and not just we, but most importantly, our school leaders know how to communicate a vision of success in their buildings.
Question? Sorry. Yep.
Yeah. I just want to ask a question. As you know, public servants who are elected by the community and different community in our, how can we work with different communities so that there is a shared ownership of these goals and keep the distraction? I don't want to use the word distraction, it's their own expression of distress as minimum as possible so that we can all kind of achieve the kind of shared ownership of these goals, and while simultaneously performing our fiduciary informed oversight role duty. Do you have any suggestions, concrete suggestions?
I think that a good starting point is continuing with our efforts around transparency. We need to share with our community where we are at, and these reports will help us with that. Will help us tell the community how many of our students are reading at third grade level, and then what are we going to do to get to some progress. And then bring their voices in through public comment, through participation in the board, but most importantly, for parents to participate in schools where the teaching and learning relationship happens. So parents to not only come to conferences, but also participate in enrichment activities, literacy activities at schools. We are excited this year at different levels to have a renewed commitment to our opportunities for families to participate in the evenings in enrichment activities. And so that's gonna be another space for us to open those doors and continue the conversation.
And I think that might be a, oh, sorry, go for it. Well, that might actually be a really nice segue to this next section, because I really do think the opportunity here as we practice the way that we look at data, we set that example. We and how we spend our time sets the model for how everybody spends their time, right? The way that we look at and monitor and expect results and see that and provide supports, align our plans, align all of our engagement to these outcomes, it, as Ola said, goes through every layer of the system, right? That when we are looking at this data and our school leaders are looking at this data, we design our report cards to look at this data and give every single member of our community and our families the opportunity to see a consistent message from all of us.
Ashley, did you want to say something?
Well, and we might get there eventually, but I think what my constant struggle is as a board member is when, like, I understand that I understand our goals, but there are so many things that we could do to achieve those goals that are not the board's, it's not our role to operationalize or necessarily even decide if that's the right thing to do to achieve that goal. But we are the elected officials that the community is coming to and bringing ideas constantly. Some of them are great ideas, some of them are not feasible, some of them we don't have the resources for, all of those things. But where I get hung up is I do not want to sit on a board where things are just reported out to me. Even if my job is to monitor that, great. I will monitor till the cows come home, but that doesn't like fill my cup as a board member. What fills my cup is understanding what's actually happening through all of you leaders in the district and bringing forward the thinking of the community or research or best practice. And a lot of times that comes internally because you are the experts that work in the district, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it comes from external entities, groups, individuals. And so where I get hung up is like, where does that come in then to our process? Because when we did a strategic plan, as a board, we aligned it to the district's strategic plan. And we talked about actions that we believed from our individual elected official capacity would help achieve those district goals. You know, like Satya brought forward things that were important to him. Marty brought forward things that were important to her. Each of us did that. All of it's not able to constantly be operationalized given our budget challenges. But how do we have those meaningful conversations without it impeding the district and your operations or feeling like you're being imposed upon, but also valuing the fact that we're all elected to do that and we're spending a lot of time to bring forward those perspectives?
Thank you.
I think this is the single hardest part of policy governance. I mean, I'm not an expert in it, but I think this is the fundamental struggle, is we all are here spending this kind of time because there are things we believe in, and excellent public schools is at the top of the list. But we each are carrying our own values about how we pursue those. And I think that that Ashley, you raising this is a really important use of this retreat time, because whether we name it explicitly or not, this is what we end up being in all year long. Mm-hmm. And some colorful graphic doesn't wash that away. It doesn't explain it away. I can't offer an answer on behalf of the board, but I can offer a perspective that I feel like I am growing into on this, which is that if we are extremely aligned on what the goals are, and there are meaningful additional ideas or perspectives that come either from you guys individually or through you from your stakeholders, the very first and most important shared order of business is a clear-eyed evaluation of whether or not that idea is actually utterly causally linked to the goal. And there are many things that do good, And we could make a generalized argument. Doing good in one area that is related to the common good contributes to the common good, contributes to the whole. But I think that the discipline we're all trying to find together and individually is the discipline of obviously, clearly, causally linked. So, I'll give you a small example. Attendance is extremely challenging right now. And a lot of our stakeholders have strong opinions about what can and should be done and what would work. And some people will say, well, we need law enforcement involved. Let's go back to truancy court. Some people will say, schools need to call families more. Being able to partner in the clear-eyed assessment, I think, is 75% of the challenge you're bringing, because it takes the idea seriously, but it takes it seriously in the context of a goal, not merely in an evaluation of whether the concept itself independently is a good idea. If we can stay stacked like that, I think we can do a lot of good and also fill each of your individual cups, because you do have your own perspectives and beliefs that are the reason you're on this board.
Yes.
I come to kind of look at policy governance board like, if you're going to build a home, you hire a main contractor. That main contractor will have subcontractor for electrician and sheetrock and water and things like that. And so as a building, if you want to build a building, you agree upon a blueprint, say this is the amount of money I have, this is the resources, and please, I want this and this quality. And then you always pass it through the main contractor to the subcontractors. Now, at every stage, I need to perform my oversight to make sure that the bathroom is exactly where it's supposed to be or the quality is there. So that's my step-by-step on an ongoing basis. And depending on that, you kind of disperse your resources. That's my simple way of kind of conceptualizing. In terms of the technical idea of how do we set the electricity and what kind of things, that is a little bit outside my thing. The real tension comes is when you have family members, etc., as Ashley said, or some community members or teachers coming and crying in front of us or hurting. This is where I think the value of making sure that as many people are there on the table from the outset, then you can have those conversations with them. For a variety of reasons, we need to really start thinking in terms of getting different communities to sit around the table, right from the conceptual stage, even understanding what a policy governance is, what are the framework in which we'll be working here, what does the simple data mean, what do you mean by desperate treatment versus desperate impact of our policies? Sometimes it's not just intentionally somebody wants to go around harming somebody, but unfortunately the outcome looks as though there is an impact on the thing. So I think once our community stakeholders have a little bit more sense of agency and understanding of this shared purpose, then we are all pushing the car in the same direction. That's what I found it helpful when I sit down with them. Because oftentimes what they are seeing is they don't have a direct way to sit in the table either with the district or with the superintendent or with the leaders. So they come to me or they come to us. So I think we may have to start looking around and saying who is missing in the groups. We do have a variety of committees, but there is a large section of community who, including educators and teachers, if there is a way we can start helping them right from the design stage, understanding how data is there, how do you read the trend, and what are some of the ideas. Then we can pull it and bring it to superintendent and say, does this connect with some goals? So that's what I'm thinking. We saw a lot of tension, a lot of ideas kept going, and sometimes it was very difficult to sit and listen and feel very helpless. What do we do with this piece of information? I hear you, Ashley.
Well, I think from, if I may, from my perspective, this allows us to channel the energy in a way that is going to help us move forward. I do believe very strongly too, Ashley, that our role is also to kind of hold up a mirror for what the community is also telling us. And it's our job to sort of like point in the direction of our long range goals. Like, this is what we're here to do. These are the things, good, bad, right, or wrong, right? Like this is where we are, and always sort of like, is this the right thing? And making, changes as we need to. But that engagement, we're committed to these, and that engagement and that trust and the ability for us to really come together as partners to be able to do this, to sort of look at what else can we be doing to help to support our teachers, our principals, or, in the stacked graphic right there with the superintendent and such, so that we can be able to have those conversations. And I think this, for me personally, helps me do that. And I think it helps us engage the community, like attendance, third grade. Those are some things that people can really rally behind. And it engages the community to be able to say, like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that 57% of our children weren't showing up for school. Like, that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. And as a business owner, as a family member, as a whatever, I can get behind that and I can do my part as well. So
There is a piece in terms of, there is a kind of tension I see. There's a lot of our immigrant communities are collective communities, a collective society. So parents get involved and family members get involved. Sometimes when we say we will listen to student voice, they misunderstand that only students will be listened to and parents are not going. It's just a matter of framing it. So, whereas the Western culture is more about autonomy and individuality and things like that. So it is really causing an intergenerational challenges and feeling a sense that I have not been included. In some collective communities, you have to go invite the family. They will not come if you send an email or a text or you just say, put it in the website, because that's the way they think. So I think there is a slight cultural proficiency in terms of understanding different culture and kind of finding them to welcoming them, because everybody really wants to be treated in the same way with dignity and respect. And you will see there's so much push. Immigrant communities are very good at getting their kids to listen to anything you want. Like, literally I'm telling you. But you have to find a way to connect with the right people first before you go to the other person. That's my observation in this place.
Thank you. I just know, as a former principal, now that I'm free during the day sometimes, when I'm out and I see children in places that I don't think they should be at that time, I said, well, honey, where do you go to school? Why are you not in school today? And that's just a simple way that everybody can help us enforce attendance. We're going to move on. Thank you all for that insight, and that, I think, really helps us transition to this next piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I do like that connection back to the vision, going to strategic planning, going to the goal setting, and then ultimately the way that we monitor those goals. There is going to be a lot of opportunity for us to do that engagement and planning together in the next year or so. But right now, we're going to look at what the end result of this looks like. So if we fast forward to a time where we have clear goals, clear strategies, and we're monitoring those results, what is that process going to look like here? We're going to go through some brass tacks, just very pragmatic examples, just so you know what that's going to look like at that end every time we check in on our results and see if we're making the progress that we need to be making. I will note, all of this is fake data. I made it up. It's all made up. It's really just for the sake of trying to understand what this is going to look like. They're not totally outside of the realm of reason, but don't take this as these are our actual results and strategies, but really as an opportunity to mock up to see what it could look like every time you revisit these data.
And if I could add there, Jonathan, I think if we want to keep Ashley's comment centered, the mock-up allows us to see a little bit more about the space you were talking about, which I think lives in clarity and discussion about whether our strategies are right.
All right, so every one of them is going to be just starting off with what exactly the metric we are is measuring, and we're going to lead, slide, with what are the data? So in this case, we'll have the simple name of the metric, the status of it, right? We have these annualized targets that we are expected to hit each year. So it's going to be very black and white as to whether or not we did or did not meet that annual target. And you're going to be able to see the historical trend to provide a little bit of context over time. Many of these metrics will have some odd gaps during the pandemic, so you might see some of those missingness, so just teeing that up now. And then hopefully see a lot of that progress coming out of the pandemic as we're moving along towards our 5-year goals. So that blue line with the circles, that's our actual data, either historical trends or the current year we're reporting on. And those rectangular box lines in red with the dashed, those are our annual targets. And so you'll see as part of that result policy, we do have for all of our outcomes annual upgrades about 1% to 2% per year that we're going to try and hit. And we might fall behind, we might make it ahead, but every year we're looking for that progress. At the bottom, you'll see just a really quick, simple definition of the data. And again, what we're trying to do is find something that is easy to understand for all members of the public. You will sometimes see very technical definitions because a lot of these are aligned to our state metrics. So best we can, we're going to try and translate those and do something that it lets it stand on its own, but we want to also make sure that you understand what exactly it is we're monitoring, because how we define those metrics do matter in terms of what we're understanding we're making out of those. The next slide will always follow with additional key data highlights. So we're going to commit to bringing forth to you subgroup breakdowns to look at that equity-related data, thinking about that targeted universalism. Which students are we seeing the most gains in progress for? Which students do we need to double down our supports for, where we are seeing gaps that we really need to highlight? And you should hold us accountable to making sure that we have clearly stated plans to support these students, right? That we're not hiding the data from what we're seeing, and we're also clearly addressing what that looks like in terms of how we're aligning resources and supports. On the right-hand side, each one of these outcome metrics are going to have KPIs, or key performance indicators. We're keeping them to 2. We know there are a lot of important metrics that can drive the progress towards these goals. However, we want to keep these to some of the smallest salient metrics that can help us truly predict whether or not we're making progress to these goals. Just as a reminder, the KPIs are not technically part of the results policy. So that's not something that you formally adopt. This is our way of saying we believe these metrics are going to be predictive of our long-term results. So we're bringing them to you to help us and you monitor our progress along the way.
Jonathan, can I adding one quick thing there? The KPIs will also help us get out of the feeling that I imagine you have, because we have it, which is annual results sneaking up on us. And then we're like, oh, it's OSAS time of year. I guess this is the only time that I find out that for a whole year, the results were trending in a certain positive or negative direction. It gives us intervals so that when OSAS comes out, we more or less know the direction that it's heading. And that will, I think, as we get into that routine, help us all feel like we're getting traction on at least the insight and ideally progress itself.
Can I add also the KPIs may change as we get more and more focused on peeling off the layers of where the issue is. And so you'll hear these around elementary literacy. We are getting better. We are understanding our data and our learners better, and then that just helps us refocus and re-engage teachers on the things that we know are now working, and then leave the things that are not working. So we're gonna be, that's the conversation we wanna participate in. Is continue our transparency and our support in, gather ideas and feedback from the community, because we're all interested in the same thing. So those will change with and as we get better at this monitoring process.
And the hope is, again, those metrics are something that is also salient for our teachers and our families and our students, because it's not going to be helpful to get your OSAS results back 3 months into the following school year, right? We need those metrics that help every single one of our students, families, teachers see the progress they're making in their own classrooms and in their own educational journey. I'm going to pause here because those are sort of the two, what the data we're bringing and how we're going to talk about it for any questions before moving on to how we're then looking at the progress and implementation of our strategy.
So, will this be public-facing, teacher-facing, student-facing, and the board-facing, right?
Yes, absolutely. All of these monitoring reports are going to be brought here to the board. They're going to be publicly available online. And as we go forward each year and see our results, we're going to be able to see that cumulative effect of tracking and monitoring and adjusting as we go in our long-term strategic plan.
Thank you.
Okay, slide. The next slide, and I'll just name right off the bat, there's a little bit of tension here between being too precise and very detailed and making things very accessible, simple, and clear so that the public can understand them. So the best we can, we're going to try and commit to words that just make sense for the people who are ultimately these data affect, for the community that we're trying to involve, and really make those clear, tangible statements of what impacts those families should see, those students should grow into, and what we're doing to achieve those. I might admit that one or two times this might go into a second slide, but we're going to hold it off to two. So you'll see here, again, a mock-up of what this might look like for attendance data, right? So it could be the case that under our attendance strategy, we have three major initiatives: family engagement, removing barriers to attendance that might be outside of the individual school day, and school community, those things that are happening inside the school that make students engaged and want to come to learn, to feel safe, to feel like they have a sense of belonging. And we'll report very quickly and wherever possible with data, the specific progress that we're making towards that initiative, right? So we might, as part of one of our action steps, try to track how much engagement our families are having every single time one of their students might miss the school day, right? So do 80% of parents, do 70% of parents sign up for our text messaging notifications? That's a key metric that helps us understand whether we're engaging our families. And so we're going to have really quick, clear, concise statements under each of those initiatives. And at the very top, a 1 to 2 sentence summary of where we're seeing progress and where we're not yet seeing that progress.
I'd like to add one thing here. When I've been meeting with principals, one of the things that I have been saying to them and owning with them, and I will do the same with you, is that in reflecting on last year, I don't know if we could have escaped the distraction of going through such a challenging year, but especially such a challenging budget reduction. It was big enough that it was going to be distracting. But if that had not happened, we would have taken last year to get the strategies and initiatives mapped out over last year so that they were in school leaders' hands before they wrote their plans for the 24-25 year. We basically lost a year in the cycle. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is just to make sure that we have the ability to look together and see that everything has to be built 12 months in advance. If we're going to have a strategic plan with strategies and initiatives this year, it would need to be done in time to be in school leaders' hands before they write their plans for next year. And so when you look at this initiative stack, what you're actually looking at partially is the artifact of being 12 months ahead and the artifact of having clear strategies and initiatives that drill all the way down to the school, family, and community levels. And that is part of what I think we are really eager to get in place, because once that's in place, everyone knows the direction that we're headed and why we're headed there. Absent that in place, every year, we're making ad hoc decisions.
Thanks, Jonathan, for walking us through. I think for all, the question I have, and maybe you can break that down on that, because when I see the initiatives, right, I think about, okay, here's our goals from, like, say, our results policy, right? Here's where we're headed, and then we have these initiatives, which to me are like, this is what we're going to do, right? Like, this is really what we're focusing our energy on. But it feels a little backwards in a sense because we don't have a strategic plan. And so if you could walk me through, where are we pulling these from? And how do we know that this is where we need to focus?
Yes. Ideally, we are exactly pulling them from our strategic plan. In this case, they're pulling them from my brain a few nights ago as I was mocking up the fake report. But if you like them, we can use part of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is the exact point said much more succinctly that I was making. Because we don't have the strategic plan with the strategies and the right initiatives with community engagement, we don't have this left column in as robust a form as we are eager to have it. And until we have that, we're going to be building and reporting simultaneously. And so we're going to have a clunky year. A clunky year that will get less clunky with each building block that we put in place. So yes.
Thank
it
you.
is-
I was like, I'm
backward.
missing something.
Yep. You indeed.
It's almost like changing oil while you're driving your car this year, right? Sounds like that.
Ashley had her hand up.
Okay, back to Jonathan.
Thank you.
Well, Ashley had her.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ashley.
I'll just be quick. So for the initiatives, I'm sorry I had to run out. Are those, if we're developing strategic plan, are we talking about a district strategic plan or a board strategic plan? Because, like I said, rewind 2 years ago, we had a district strategic plan, which we need a new one. Yes, like not arguing that. We tried to develop a board strategic plan that aligned and meshed with the district one, because you don't want two different strategic plans trying to drive work or make progress on goals. So does the board then help inform the district one? How do you see that happening?
Yeah. So
And it would just be a district one and not a board one? Like, yeah.
I completely agree. They should as much as possible, be the same plan and aligned and have one consistent, unified vision for all of our work that each then individual sees their role and their committee's role in, right? So in the same way that a board has a strategic plan that supports and develops ours, in the same way that a school leader has their school strategic plan that aligns to our outcomes and our strategies, in the same way that a teacher has their strategic plan for their classroom for the year. All of these things interweave together, and going back to that first graphic, yeah, it rolls all the way up to us.
Thank you.
The final slide is just a really quick summary of what's ahead for us. And so you'll see this in a minute, but when we get to the actual evaluation, right, it's that we might not be meeting our annual goal right now, but we are going to ask the board to evaluate whether or not we're making progress and whether or not we have a strong and robust plan ahead of us to make the progress that we need to hit over those 5 years. So this is a clear, concise statement of the most important next steps based on the data that we are tracking, the results that we are seeing, the actions that might be successful and we need to double down on, or the actions that might not have worked and we need to better understand why and whether or not we should continue to do them. And the more precise we have those clear expectations and actions and measure the impact for our students, and ideally measure the ROI of not are we just making effective actions, but are we being strong fiduciary owners of the funds that we have to make sure that we're investing them in as best as way as possible and in the most equitable way as possible. This is obviously going to be a very short and small slice of all the work that's going on in the system. But again, keeping that balance between level of detail and ultimately, can we simplify it enough so everybody understands what we're trying to do and align to that mission every time we're going out and talking to a family and why are you not in school? What school do you go to, right? To know that if we're removing barriers, what opportunities exist for those community resources to connect our families to. That's the example. So any final questions on template, content, what this might look like?
So just to follow up on what Ashley was asking. So in the policy governance thing, the board has kind of articulated here's the goals and stay within the lanes kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of what you shared are operational elements of how do we achieve that goal. So won't it be important for the district to do the strategic planning and then say, how does it align with the board's goal? And then come back and probably report to the board saying, this is what it is. And as long as we stay within the budget and within the lanes. And so we can be informed of the operational strategies.
Absolutely, yes. I think it goes back to ideally, and as we're working on building that strategic plan, it will have that direct alignment. So I'm imagining a world where we have a plan that we are pulling exactly those things and elements from the table on, so that once we're all aligned, we've gotten the feedback and the input, and we said, this is our plan, these are the actions and initiatives that we're pulling from. We've committed to those ahead of time, and we're simply reporting on the results of those initiatives and what adjustments we might need to make based on progress.
So based on what you just shared, it's almost like every child, every family, every teacher, every day, kind of like a one vision kind of thing, right?
Yes.
So
Yep.
then we are aligning everything. The goal is improved attendance and engagement. And then you're talking about all these operational details.
Right.
And if we know, then we can remove the barriers, as Olga was saying, to making that happen by talking to our communities. All right.
Yes. And we do indeed owe exactly that clarity to everybody. And so we're not making it up ad hoc and writing new plans every year, but every single teacher, every single school leader knows what their multi-year vision looks like for their schools, because we've helped set that collective vision together.
All right. Yes, Ashley?
I just have one more question. So on BG1, are we thinking then we'll change that a little bit or work to change it over time? Because right now it says the board will cultivate long-range vision for education through periodic strategic planning and annual goal setting. So just for the nuts and bolts, like, would we participate in the strategic planning? Or is it more like, are you wanting to see, like, we do annual goal setting and then strategic planning is, tiered under goal setting?
Thank you for referring us back to that. What I would say on the annual goal setting is that has been done.
Right.
And then even inside that, if you look at the detail of the policy, it says it'll be reviewed annually and revised if necessary. So that is a function that is underway, but still requires annual vigilance. On the strategic plan itself, although the content of that, strictly clinically speaking, under policy governance sits with the executive officer, that is not a strong practical concept, because a strategic plan is too important of a public document for it to just kind of be done on the side. So our vision for this, and this happens to be a year where under OD requirements, we have to do integrated planning anyhow. This is a year where we have community conversations that are not about the budget, thankfully. They're about the future. They're about the strategies. It's about making sure that we're collecting a lot of perspectives from a lot of groups about what the strategies need to focus on and look like. The board is a central partner in that, and the strategic plan flows in draft and in intermediate and final forms through the board. It is honestly my recommendation, although it does not comply strictly with policy governance, that the board is an adopting body on that plan, because it is all of ours. If it does not feel like all of ours, we will just be in kind of constant friction around it. So I don't know if that demands that we change BG1, but that is the way that I think this works best.
I agree.
Yeah, I think I agree. I do want to just put a pin in, I think we should change the language of BG1 if that's the direction we're going, because I don't think it's clear as written whose role it is to cultivate the strategic plan.
Well, I kind of nicely put it, if things go well, thanks, superintendent. Things go bad, come and yell at us. In other words, a buck stops with the board in the end. So we kind of delegated in this case as a policy governance, but ultimately being involved at every stage, knowing what's going on, and leave the operational piece to stay within the EL budget is probably one way to change it. Technically, all the aspects, something goes wrong, comes to the board. That's how I believe that ORS or OAR or whatever is written.
I appreciate you bringing it because I agree. I think this like 1 year planning, it just does not, for me, it does not work, right? Like it doesn't allow us opportunity to really think forward, to really think ahead. It's just like very reactive. So appreciate it.
Can we take a break?
We will in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to quickly go through just a few operational next steps, and especially things that will affect you as a board, so you just know what's coming and how we're actually going to roll this out. So just a quick heads up on the next 2 slides. We're not going to go through it. This is just the reminder that our board goals and results policy is aligned to the state's longitudinal performance growth targets. So you might see some terms back and forth. Really, it goes back to 1 plan, 1 set of outcomes, and not 5 plans and 5 sets of outcomes. Next slide just goes into, again, how those sort of work together in terms of timing. We'll adopt a formal timing and cadence over the year. And again, those results policies are locked in terms of the metrics. The KPIs adjust based on the relevance of the actions that we're partaking. In a long-term plan, you'll probably have more long-term clarity of what are major milestones over the year that might help inform those KPIs. The next slide just gives us a sense of when and how we're going to do the executive limitations monitoring. One subtle note here that you're going to see in terms of both the timelines and the shift is we are, as much as possible, moving the final evaluation and the examination of the results to the time and place where those results were monitored. So we're not waiting 1 full year later to know how well we did last year, because that means next year's plan is already baked because we're already through the planning cycle. So the earlier we can move up the monitoring of our results to the time when it happens, the better we can make those annual adjustments as we build over the multiple years. And the next slide, this is just brass tacks, right? At the end of the day, when we say, what does it mean to tie the district's evaluation to the superintendent's evaluation? This is it. I will leave that for you as far as reading through all the technical details, but call out that, again, results policy, those outcomes for students, that is the heaviest weight of it. We can't entirely ignore the executive limitations. And then the final smallest portion is a set of superintendent-defined leadership goals, right? Is the superintendent representing the way that you expect her to lead our system? There are particular points associated with it. They go up to 100 points. The one call that I do want to make within the results policy, right? If we meet the target, that is the target, full points, right? We're obviously making great progress. We're moving on. Let's continue to get those results. It might be possible that we don't hit the annual target, but we make what you as the board decide as individuals when doing this evaluation, what is reasonable progress and a robust plan to catch back up to our annual targets. It might be the case that we did not meet our annual targets, we didn't see evidence, but we've addressed that progress for you in terms of a strong plan moving forward. Or it might not have a strong plan, or we might not have submitted the report, right? But those are the elements and times where you can help us evaluate whether or not you think that our goals and strategies are going to get us to where we need to go.
I'll add one quick note on that part. This goes back to an earlier conversation. So, we've seen preliminary OSAS results, and I think I can fairly forecast for you that we're not going to see the kind of progress we hoped for from last year. But there does have to be a moment where you say to me, and I say to everyone, if this isn't happening, the leadership that Salem-Keizer deserves is also not happening. You have to just pick the moment and line up and say, this is what matters most. And so I will tell you right now, I don't even need to strain through mental math. There will not be 60 points. If you were to adopt this evaluation model, I will not be receiving 60 points in this next year. And that is okay, because we're starting to line up an absolute clarity. Starting with the board and the superintendent and the executive team. And then once that is in place, and there is no doubt in Olga's mind or in Danielle's mind which of those belong to them. And then there's no doubt in our level director's mind of which belong to them. And that's how it works its way down through the system. It does not happen in 1 year, but it does move fast once the biggest pieces are in place.
And then we'll skip 2 slides forward to do the final, oh, sorry, one more. The final bit of it, which is one of the other things we will be doing is giving you, the board, an earlier draft of this monitoring report so you can read it and submit questions to us. So we are prepared to bring you robust answers backed with data ahead of time and in that meeting, because nothing's going to be worse than us getting a question and being like, well, we can pull the data for you later, right? If we are prepared with the questions that you have and can bring that solid evidence, whether or not it's good or bad, that's going to help us have a better monitoring discussion, because we won't be able to pull every single data point into this one report ahead of time that might be relevant to you. But if we get that 2-week head start, we can commit to doing the best we can to pulling every piece of data and evidence and artifact that we have access to.
Wow, exciting times ahead of us. Thank you so much, Jonathan. At this time, we'll take a 5-minute break. Please come back at 10:31.
Okay. Go back.
All right. At this time, we will focus on our last presentation, which will be given by our Chief Operations Officer, Bob Silver. He's going to speak to us on school funding.
And our superintendent.
We're going to share this one.
Okay.
So going back to, just quickly to kick this off, I want to reference something that jointly Ashley and Lisa said in their own ways in the very beginning part of the meeting. Ashley talked about Salem-Keizer's music program and how it's just this source of incredible achievement and pride and is so meaningful to everyone who is touched by it. And Lisa mentioned the importance of us working to make sure that those stories are part of our public image. And the reason that I want to start with that is that there is so much excellence in our district. And we have a responsibility to talk about hard things too. But this year, I believe this year is one where, because of the work we put in last year, we have earned the right and we have the responsibility to be very forward-looking and to make it about all the things that are great and are possible. And I am really looking forward to that. In talking with building leaders and community members over the course of the last month, I've had an opportunity to hear from a number of people, and almost always in the community they'll start with, "Ooh, that was a hard year." And that means that the hardness is on people's mind, and we have a chance to convert an image of things being hard to an image of things being possible. I am really excited to do that with everyone and with you. So to talk about school funding this year, I am so happy and relieved and grateful to you all that talking about funding this year is going to feel different. And we can actually move through a lot of this quite briefly. So if you can advance the slide. We're going to cover three things here. I'm going to give you a little bit of insight about what it means to have seen and the importance of the governor's proposal around an adjustment in state funding. We're going to talk a little bit about what we see coming for 25 and what it means just practically for you as a board and for our schools and staff. And then we're going to talk about, just introduce to you just the nuts and bolts of what a local option levy is. And it is time to have that conversation as a board because we need to be thinking about resources broadly and in an aligned way that helps us achieve the goals we just discussed. Erin, can you advance the slide? There we go. So what you see here, you might have read in the paper, I think it got broadly covered, is that there was a significant change in very important commitment by the governor that she saw through. In the spring, I'd say that the winter and spring, she made a commitment to working through a expert working group to redesign the method that the state used to calculate how much it costs to run the schools we currently have. Now, Satya, you've done a lot of your own research and thinking in this area. This is not a conversation about the schools we need. This is not about what QEM model, for example, would demand. This is literally just the technical method to assess how much it costs to run what we have and how that cost will change over a biennium. It is a technicality, but one of the most important technicalities we face. They did that work through a work group over the spring, and as a result of that, made some really extremely important changes to the method, the calculation method. Everyone in this room has heard me talk about this flawed calculation method. Sophia, I think I talked about it in the student advisory group, media, to you, everywhere. it really was terribly flawed. And the changes that she has moved forward with matter greatly. Those changes alone would be, the Salem-Keizer share of them would be about 36 million over the new biennium. Now, I want to be clear about a couple of things about this. That 36 million is an estimate. It is an estimate based on an initial commitment that has not been realized yet in multiple ways. So we should not think of this as money that's coming to us. One, it is a commitment to put it in the budget, but she has not released her budget yet. I am sure we will see it in there, but it's not in there yet. And then the second, it just has to move through the entire appropriation process. So changes may come over the course of that time. The 515 might get driven down, but there will be, I think, Salem-Keizer amongst them, a strong contingent that will be there to argue for the importance of that funding. It could also get driven up because it didn't, that 515 does not include some things that really matter, like adjusting the special education cap. So there are other places where there's pockets where key advocacy will be an important part of the months that come. So that's why May is both italicized and highlighted. We cannot count on this funding yet, but we can be grateful for this very significant change. Can you go to the next slide? So let's look at our current budget preview, and I want to remind you of something that even after all my work on this, I slipped on the other day. Let's just say that that 515 comes through. It comes through for the next biennium, the next fiscal years. The reductions that we made last year will stand for the current school year, and we will not see additional state money for that. So just a few quick bullets here, and this is really a reminder of a very recent past. So after about 70 million in reductions and adjustments, we still left about a $27 million gap in there. I think we all remember that. Not only should we not have, I believe we could not have closed that much in a single year. But even with this in here, and even with the good that it did on our ending fund balance and staying in policy targets, I do not believe we will need to reduce again. Yesterday, we were with a lot of other districts, and I was in a room with many, and I asked them how many were funding their school system on reserves this year, which is just a way of saying how many of you have a structural gap. Virtually every single hand in the room. This is a structural gap that I think we can live with right now. It is not ideal, but it is manageable. We can mitigate it. And we have an ending fund balance that is healthy enough that we can carry it. This goes back to my opening statements about a year that is about possibility. People need to hear at the outset that this is not another year of reductions, that we did what we had to do. This is a year of settling and planning our recovery. I want to quickly point out this last bullet here. So we have this gap, but you remember us telling you about how that was if we spent every single dollar that you all approved in our budget, which we never do. Our vacancy savings is our most important way to close the gap without making any reductions. And you can see that for each 1% vacancy rate, it's worth about a $5 million savings. This is why I will argue that a $27 million budgeted structural gap is acceptable to us, because we are not going to spend 100% of our budgeted funds for personnel. There are always vacancies. Can you go to the next slide? So this is what it looks like if we include a 2% vacancy savings estimate, which we think is a conservative estimate. we will be surprised if we do not achieve a 2% vacancy savings rate. So you can see that gap without doing anything automatically shrinks down. You can see that our ending fund balance is still, I mean, it falls a little because we are using it, but it's still healthy. That's still, it's a low end of policy targets, but it's still in it. So this is an absolutely healthy, powerful second chapter to a very first chapter, which was the need for urgent action. I'm going to pause here. This is mostly just a refresher, but I want to pause and see if you guys have questions or observations about this before I hand it over to Bob. Okay. Actually, I think I have one more slide, and then I'm handing it over to Bob. So strategies for closing the gap. One, we are going to continue monitoring super carefully. Sarah's team is already lined up around this, and it's just like it was last year. Every single month, truing up expenses to budget. And if there is any variance there, we're managing it aggressively. There will not be overages. The key is going to be any accumulated savings is going to the right purpose. If we need to adjust it in any way, we're doing it really thoughtfully because we want to close that gap. And then I just will pause and say on continued advocacy efforts, one of the things that I believe we're in a good position to do as an organization through you as the board is name a legislative agenda explicitly for the new biennium. This is a good time of year to do it. We can coalesce in partnership with OSBA and with COSA with other districts. But for our board to publicly and clearly adopt a legislative agenda will give us what we need to participate in advocacy around state funding as we lead up into the new biennium. So that is something that I'm eager to be part of as you guys work on that in the fall. And then we also need to be, honestly, looking in creative and new ways at where we can bring in additional revenue. The state is an avenue, but it is not the only avenue. And one of the things that we want to just introduce here in a very practical nuts and bolts way is to talk about what a local option levy is. Today, we will not be forecasting, making any decisions, but we are going to take this important time at a retreat as a body to make sure that we understand this statutory funding mechanism, what it looks like in other parts of the state, and how it functions and how it happens. So I'm going to pause there again before I hand it over to Bob.
I guess question around the budget piece and more so because this last year we had a lot of conversations around, the gaps, the budget, and I think just the conversation we've had today, right, about really wanting to think forward and in terms of strategic planning, in terms of, outcomes. But this is still such an important part. So I think my question really is just like, what can we expect in terms of reporting to the board and what the conversation around the financials will look like in the boardroom this year, seeing that we're not facing that. Yeah, so I think that's just like something that would be helpful for me to kind of grasp my mind around as I'm thinking about, okay, what are the outcomes that we're going to be tracking, but also how do we still keep this front and center? And obviously the legislative process, I think, is going to force us in some way. But yeah, how, when, and like if you have an idea for what that might look like and what those conversations might be centered around. But
I still think we should continue quarterly monitoring. We're in a comparatively good place, but that doesn't mean that board level fiduciary vigilance isn't still required. So we'll continue with the quarterly reports, but they won't feel so high stakes. Last year, every report was like, okay, how big is it going to be? How big is it going to be? How much will we have to cut? This will be, I think, actually a little bit of the reverse. How much of the gap are we closing? And how quickly are we closing it without the pressure of having to reduce again beyond the savings that you kind of naturally achieve through vacancies? So I believe that's what we should continue doing.
Agree. Thank you.
Chair, I really appreciate what you shared, and it feels like a relief, at least for short term. You can breathe. I think one of this topic around legislative agenda, since we are a very large district and we have made some very important changes, I would suggest that this may be a time to ask for almost like a radical change in the way the school funding works. Start thinking in terms of a Massachusetts model or Pennsylvania or one of the New Jersey models of progressive school funding. Because for a long time, our state, even now, our state is a very regressive school funding model. And to do like a costing, not just continue the current service level. I say for the following reasons: 21% of our budget actually goes towards PERS payment, for example. So that really leaves whatever the remaining part to actually pay the salaries and wages and run the school, right? So there are ways in which a progressive school model will help us protect the amount of money that we can. So that may be one way to approach it. I'm little, right now we can plug the gap by governor's kindness if that budget passes through. But moving forward, if we want to really jumpstart our education and take us in the future and to really think, we have to go back to Oregon Constitution, which really talks about equity as a constitutional requirement. And I believe in the chapter 8 or whatever it is, clause 8. So we may have to find a way to leverage this momentum we have in time and start saying this may be a time to do a solid costing study and think in terms of adopting a progressive model. Even if you have to copy the Massachusetts design and start, it's not bad. Rather than trying to just put Band-Aid to whatever system we have. Because let's face it, this year we had plenty of money, tax-wise. Yet we are finding this discrepancy. And as long as we have to depend on the state for a variety of reasons, ballot measure 550, I think this may be a place for us to say, no, we can't just keep doing this again and again every 2 years. Because inflation has really affected a lot of our communities, and it's really, really hurting. Everything is expensive. It's about 30% more in the last few years. Teachers and families and single parents are struggling. So my worry is this may be a time for us as a school board and with all the larger district to say, we need a complete paradigm change as opposed to incremental changes, if we really believe in equity and closing the gap. Otherwise, I'm not sure with how the inflation will affect, and we may or may not be able to meet that. Our teachers are going to be hurting, and staff are going to be hurting. They're going to come and say, this is not enough, or people will leave and go. Housing is beyond expense. Most of our teachers can't even afford a rent, let alone purchase a home in this town. So these are some reality of my community is facing. We will have mid-year transitions. People will leave and go. And we know that's not good for graduation or anything like that. Our number of children enrolled will drop. So we may have an opportunity to put a little bit more as a legislative concept and say, how do we completely revamp and redo the design rather than current service level model? And just continuing it, and do a solid costing study post-pandemic. Nobody has done it. So I would really think that's one suggestion I have for all of us. Thank you.
Ashley?
I have two questions, or they're questions. So one, when we're anticipating the vacancy savings that you're talking about, it gives me a little bit of heartburn because I feel like we had to make such significant reductions to FTE, and
we don't yet know how that's going to play out for students over the course of the year. And if additional positions become vacant, holding them vacant at an already reduced number of FTE makes me worried about our ability to achieve our strategic goals. And so could you just share a little bit about your thinking and how you'll manage the vacancies, and like, are some going to be then prioritized for filling right away from the recall, like all just your thinking around that, Superintendent?
I'm really glad you asked for that clarification. When we offer, so in the last few years, we've been running between a 7 and 9% vacancy rate. So when we say conservative, we really do mean conservative. And this 2% does not include intentionally holding school-based positions vacant. This is just accounting for the accumulated loss of, a month here, 2 weeks there, 6 weeks here for the harder to fill positions. When we build our staffing plan and we presented it to you along with the cuts, it was never our intention to be managing to a vacancy savings target. Our staffing plan is built with the assumption that those seats are filled and we'll be filling them as fast as we can fill them. And John, you might be able to share a little bit more, but we have been recalling all summer. I doubt John on the spot has full vacancy information, but I think you can tell us a little bit about how we're doing on the recall process. Maybe just, since it's not a posted portion of the agenda, just a
Tiny update, but to the vacancy savings, that naturally happens without trying to hold anything vacant, because we often have people that leave for all the reasons we know. They give us notice and depart. As soon as we receive notice, we begin the process to refill that. But oftentimes, there's still a gap between when the new person is hired and when the other person is departed, and that's vacancy savings. And that's a large part of what we're talking about. Not on the agenda, but just as an information point for the board today. On the licensed side, we now have only one licensed person who hasn't been recalled. And we're happy to say that everyone else that wanted a position, we had, through the attrition process, the ability to bring them back.
Wow, that's huge.
Good job.
Thank you. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for that clarification. I think just for the public, ensuring that we're going to be staffed at what we hoped, and then evaluating throughout the year if that's enough for the next year to meet our goals is important. The second question I have, unless there's someone else who has one, I don't. Go right ahead. Okay. When you're talking about adopting a legislative position or agenda for the board, my mind immediately jumps to process and how we might go about doing that, given what Satya brought up. Just, I know in the past, a lot of times we have just worked kind of in concert with OSBA for a broader, ask to the legislature, but I do, which I'm happy to participate in and would like to participate in, but I do think there's specific things for our district to advocate for each long legislative session. So I'm just curious how we might go about building our legislative agenda.
I don't think I have a full answer for you yet. I can tell you the initial steps we've taken. So I've been working with the larger districts to get samples of every other district that has started to move in a legislative agenda through their board. Mostly because I think we would benefit from seeing what the 10,000 plus student district, the boards of those districts are shaping up. And it can be an initial basis, but it isn't the entirety, nor is it a simple kind of cookie cutter adoption. At that point, then I think you as a board can work together and also with OSBA and through us, COSA, to really look at the impact of a specialized adoption on our side. I can give you an example of something that I think matters greatly to us. Every district might not choose to include in their legislative agenda advocacy around adjustment of the special education cap. That cap is currently at 11%, and the district average across the state is over 14. We are right around like 17 and low change. The difference between 11 and 17 is $30 million over the biennium for us. Our size and the factors that make our community unique and important mean that that might be something that is of great interest to this board, but only nominal interest to a board that is in a very different community with a different gap. And then I'll briefly go back to something Satya offered, because I do think it will be an important consideration for you guys. That 515 million that I talked about, the 515 is in addition to what would have come through the calculation model if nobody adjusted it. The total increase is 1.1 billion. That's a 10% increase if it goes through. That will be one of the most significant commitments in Oregon's K-12 funding history. And it's partially because it adjusts the method forever. What's been happening till now is we erode and we're a little short, and we erode and we're a little short, and it just accumulates over time. This largely fixes the method. I offer the 1.1 billion because this board and every other board and body is gonna have to judge where you want your advocacy line to fall. Defending and advancing 1.1 billion in a state that is not expecting a surplus revenue year, or asking for even more, or some combination of the two. It's a really important tactical decision that everybody who engages in this conversation needs to make, and I think it would be best made in conversation with OSBA as well, who's got a lot of insight and intelligence about what's coming up and how important and difficult it might be.
Superintendent Castaneda, I hear you. One other way of perhaps looking at it is having one long-term concept for more sustainable, progressive funding model, and another one as a short term. Because, obviously, if you say, what does it take to, what is the costing study? That's going to take its own time. It's not like it's going to be ready by then. So perhaps we could have both and start saying, because as a state, we need to change the paradigm. There's no doubt about it. If not now, when will we change? This is the hardest hit, where pretty much every small districts have gone into financial insolvency. That's never heard of in recent times in our state. So perhaps we could ask for a long-term change in the way we look at costing and the model, because PERS is going to live with us. And some of the small counties, small districts can't even have a capital money to replace their building. And then we can have a short-term thing like a cap in it. Another example would be only 2 weightage are we allowed to use, only 2. I don't know what's the science behind it, especially when we have intersectionality of so many social adversities our children face. For example, they could be limited English proficiency family. They could have special needs. They could be homeless, or they could have, special educational need, but only 2 we are allowed to pick. So there are a lot of smaller things we can ask for, and but we can also start having the conversation on some kind of long-term sustainable solution. That's where perhaps we could approach it that way.
I think what we're seeing here is energy around the importance of reviewing what's out there and discussing it as a body. I think it would be best to have this adopted before October, and feel confident and solid on what you all have chosen. I do also want to be mindful that legislative advocacy was not on our posted agenda. I think we're using the review of our funding and our forecasting to talk about it, but we probably should add it to a future agenda and make it its own freestanding topic with the time it deserves. Yep. And it's a complex topic.
Well, it's more a process to achieve our goal. That's how I see it. It's a kind of without money, I can't fulfill our mission, right? Yeah. So it's more a process issue rather than, because sorry, that's how I see it. I see it's still compatible in order to achieve we can't let go of our teachers and still achieve the goal. That's going to be hard to do both.
Do we hand it back to Bob?
Okay. So as we talk about how to generate more local revenue or more revenue in general, one of the things that we wanted to give you a primer on was local option levy. Without going into the technical details of Measure 5 and Measure 50 and the way the whole property tax system works, an easy way to think about a local option levy in relation to bonds is that bonds are for buildings and levies are for learning. Bonds use the same mechanism for property taxes that levies do, but bonds are for capital improvements, usually go out for 30 years, and levies are more operational and are only good for 5 years at a time. So that's a quick way to create a distinction in your mind about the difference between the bonds and the levies. So through the different measures, Measure 97 to be specific, school districts can seek voter approval for a local option property tax to cover operational expenses. It's important to know that local option taxes, much like bond dollars, are excluded from the local revenue for the state school fund. Even though a portion of property taxes collected for education do roll up into the state school fund, local option taxes are exempt from that up to certain limits. And again, we'd have to talk about Measure 5 and stuff like that. Needless to say, for Salem-Keizer, those limits would not be in effect if we were to look at a local option levy in the future. Then a local option levy can be levied in two different ways. The board could decide to levy a total dollar amount. So we could say, I want to levy $10 million for the next 5 years for a total levy of $50 million. Or you could apply a dollar amount per thousand of assessed value. And then that would generate a certain amount of revenue over those 5 years. So most of I believe actually all of the levies in Oregon use a dollar amount per thousand of assessed value calculation mechanism. So a little bit of background in Oregon. Again, levies were made into law in 1999. The first local option levy was actually voted on in 2001 down in Corvallis School District. And currently there are about 20 districts that have an active local option levy. And combined, they generate about $250 million in local school revenues across the state. The dollar amount across those levies ranges from as low as 30 cents per thousand of assessed value all the way up to $1.99, which is Portland Public Schools. The biggest bulk of the levies center around about the $1.50 range for the rate per thousand. And then important note in my research, the amount of the initial levy has continued throughout the life of the levy. So even that levy for Corvallis back in 2001, they still have the same rate that they initially went out with. So that's just something to be aware of as we move forward in our research. Yes.
So do you mean that, like, if they went out, if Corvallis's original one was like $1, then when they go again, they always pick $1?
Do they have to? No.
But they just traditionally do?
Right.
Okay.
So
it's not a surprise to taxpayers. It's like, this
correct.
is just a renewal or something like that.
So
Okay.
all of the renewals so far that I've seen have renewed at the same levy rate. It's not that there's any restriction from you changing the rate. But at that point, it's very similar to going out for a completely new rather than continue funding what's already been funded. So with like a bond, you can have a bond where it doesn't increase property taxes, it just continues the same amount of property taxes, or you can have a bond where there is an increase and that's a much higher threshold to pass. So again, with local option levies, what we've seen is they've carried on, for the most part, the same rate from their initial efforts. So.
And do they generally pass the second or third time? Or, you know? Sorry.
A lot of them on this side of the state have been successful in renewing. I am aware of a few in the eastern side that have failed renewals, and while they ran it for multiple years, something changed and the community has decided not to approve them anymore. So that is always a possibility.
As we move into this timeline slide, I want to lead by being really clear about something. So the same way Jonathan was offering us a monitoring report with sample data, just so it was concrete, this is not a recommendation for May. This is like a date so that we can see what a concrete action would look like. You know, you can do it in general elections, so technically we could do it in November, we could do it in May, you could do special elections. There are a whole bunch of permutations. But largely, no matter which date you choose, the sequence of actions looks a lot like what Bob's gonna walk us through here.
So again, imagining a May 20, 2025 timeline. If we backtrack from that timeline, we would be in what we're calling, well, I think in this instance, this is what we're doing, and that's initial research, right? Is a local option levy something that the school district wants to pursue further? So we're still in that research phase. So moving on from that is really about stakeholder engagement, getting out, engaging the community, educating them, depending on the timeline. I've seen school districts, Gresham Barlow went on a 2-year campaign to be able to, in their case, to pass a bond, but they had a 2-year runway that they used. So that's kind of, depending on how early you start, there's a period of time that you really get out into the community and educate them on what the priorities are, as well as collecting their input and feedback to help refine what you're going to ask in any type of measure that you put on the ballot. Again, using May as a sample election date, that would go up until November, December. And then at some point, the board would have to take action authorizing the placement of a measure onto the ballot. So, and a component of that would also be the wording of the ballot title, which would include the priorities. In other words, what would the money be spent on? And again, that would be refined usually through the community engagement process leading up to that. So that would be in the November, December timeframe. And then at that point, kind of the campaign really starts. It's from a district point of view, there's an informational campaign, which is just sharing information, not advocacy with the public. So that's just, making sure that staff, parents, community members are aware of here's what we're asking for, how much we're asking for, and how it's going to be used. So at similar time frame, the Political Action Committee usually gets created and membership and really starts focusing on the advocacy component separate from the school district, but they the political action committee goes out there doing the door knocking, doing the, the cheerleading, as well as, board members play a role in that as well, to really try to push a campaign for any type of measure that you put on the ballot. So that would last from February to May in this sample scenario here. So again, if we backtrack to now, it's the research phase to determine whether or not a levy or a measure is the next step that we want to take. And then you can see the remainder of what a timeline would look like for a May election notice. Rena.
Yeah, could you give a couple examples of what levy dollars can be spent for, or maybe oftentimes are used for? Like, what are some of the parameters or limitations around those?
For the most part, very similar to a bond, when you place a measure onto a ballot, you have 150 words, I believe, to basically say this is what we would spend this money on. From a statutory point of view, it's really a difference between operational and capital. So you can do a capital-based levy, but generally the 5-year levy is operational expenses, and that pretty much covers anything that's not a capital expense.
It's pretty open-ended there.
Yeah.
I'd like to add to that, though, it's open-ended in the way Bob described. It's constrained in a different way, which is that I bet if each of us were given the opportunity to say, I want to invest, whatever, I'm going to make up a number.
For ergonomic chairs.
Yeah, exactly. $10 million a year. Hypothetical number. Each of us would come up with a priority list of how we were going to spend that. Those priority lists matter to us, even if we as a board, well, you as a board, could completely align on those lists. It is only as relevant as it agrees with taxpayer voter sentiment. So what you can spend it on has the very real practical constraint of, will our community pass it? And that's where this is, like, one of I think the questions that people are most inclined to ask first is, well, what would we spend the money on? And you kind of are in this catch-22 for a little while. Well, we spend the money on what we value most and knows will move our results, and taxpayers and voters will approve. Well, what will voters approve? Well, we would have to poll and find out. So there is a bit of an iterative process. Lisa, you have a lot of experience with this on the bond side. You can probably add some words of experience.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how incredibly important the stakeholder engagement is in this process. And I know in my experience with the last bond, we made a real intentional purpose. I mean, we as a planning or a facilities task force did a lot of work looking at all the different scenarios and looking what was needed, what were the must-haves, nice-to-haves, all of those kind of things. And then really took it out to the community to say, this, based on this is what we think, but we need to hear from you. And that was so incredibly important. And I think that becomes, along with some polling, but that becomes your bellwether. And allows us, I think, the opportunity with our earlier conversation around our priorities and where we want to go as a district to be able to say, this is who we are, this is who we want to be, and we need your help in helping us get there. And that's incredibly important to do. Even if you have made, I think you have to do that before you make a decision on whether or not to go forward. I think also what will be important for us to think about, should we go down this direction, is sort of thinking about the landscape of what else is happening out in the community with other potential levies, and that then goes back into what will our community say yes to.
I have a question.
Can I also add, I'm gonna add one quick thing and then turn to your question. So, when you imagine how this funding mechanism works, obviously you're collecting revenue from property owners. And so the ability to actually collect and realize and incorporate that funding into our budget is always a year out. So I just want to overlay that practically over the earlier conversation we have. I mean, like, though we are absolutely not, even if we were running it in November, it's not like we are collecting that revenue right away. There's still a pretty long waiting period. It's almost a year that you're waiting for your first infusion. So this is a thoughtful long game, I think, is partially what I'd like to add to your comments.
If I could, I would 100% agree, and that sort of comes back to like because I think your average property tax payer doesn't always see that. They see their bill going up, and they're paying more, and so they're expecting more in a more immediate way. So being really clear about that.
So the question I have is, we are going to be needing to do like a stakeholder involvement for goal setting and strategic planning that is required, right? Could that feed into some of this information and saying, based on that input from the community, what are their gaps they see? And then that could be one way to define this thing. And I'm sure public will be willing to support if they see a value in this adding directly to their children. Because, in this time, I believe the city is going through one of their levy process, and community college is coming up with their bond process. So, I was just doing a quick calculation. If it is a $300,000 home, it's like $450 a year, using $1.50 as a thing, right? So, between the three bonds, let's say the two levies and one bond passes, that's like close to 1,000 plus out of their thing. So it has to be very clear what this money will be used. Will there be a levy oversight committee? And there is a mechanism to report to the community, this is what your dollars bought. And the second part is, we have close to $1.2 billion worth of state property which don't get taxed. Will this levy include some form of collection from the state towards our school district if we pass this levy? Because they're sitting like a big elephant in the room in our city, and they don't pay a dime.
I think that's the exact conversation the city is having right now, and feeling it in an even more pointed way than we are, in truth. I want to go back and address a couple of things in your first question. Obviously, this is just the conversation to talk about the nuts and bolts. What is it? How does it function? What would need to be considered for you all to feel like you're having an informed decision-making process? And even in this part, I think it is really important that we try to be as accurate as possible. The mental math that you just did is exactly what voters will do, but it will usually produce the wrong calculation. This is one of the challenges of educating voters, because I think part of the mental math you did was imagining that every levy is additive. But the functional tax rate, some things are coming off as other things are coming on. Like, we're coming out of our bond, Chemeketa is filling in some of the space. So for your mental math, and your example of it is a really good example of how much education would have to happen. I think it is improbable there'd be a situation where taxes were going up at the rate you described, but that is exactly what people will do. And so, among many other things, it just requires an exceptionally clear education portion, so that people have calculators and they know exactly what the impact is going to be. Then on the other side, I think your idea about, incorporating feedback through strategic planning is really wise. We don't want to be going out every 6 months to our community with some other big engagement question. That is actually confusing. it makes people feel that we're constantly changing course. This needs to be aligned and stacked. And if we choose to do it on whatever timeline you all would choose, a long runway, so that it doesn't have those conflicting elements in it.
So this should go parallel with our advocacy with the legislature. It should not be in lieu of legislature advocacy, because our constitution demands that there is equitable funding for public schools, and that's the right thing to do. So my hope would be both. We do both if we decide to do this way. Because the state shouldn't turn around and say you're already happy with what you've collected, so no need for us to give the money. Because no, that's not correct.
So to Andrea's point, if the district did move forward, there's a lot of things that the district itself would perform going through the process of managing a local option ballot initiative. But then there's also a role that the board plays. And so I'm going to hand it back to Andrea. for that.
One thing that I just want to put in the room, and I think Bob actually can add some additional commentary on this, is that these are very far, in any community, these are very far from sure things. They get voted down all the time. And if you were following any of the Bend news, you will see that Bend got voted down. I do think it's possible that we are in a period of a turn on voter sentiment. The economy feels like, to the average person, like it is contracting and risky. And that makes it harder for people to vote yes on things like that. So I just want to, just really enter that into the conversation. I could not possibly put odds, but we just need to be aware that a loss is a very possible outcome. And sometimes you sustain a loss en route to an eventual victory. Sometimes you have to run it a couple times even. But Bob, you've had a chance to talk to communities that have passed and failed. Is there anything that you think is a helpful addition to this part of this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, just in the two recent conversations I had, a large difference was the engagement out in the community. And the more that you engage and tell your story and put a face and, your values, sharing your values, so that they understand that, yes, there's school district, there's, national narrative and feelings about K-12 in general, but just make it real for your local community. This is what's really happening in our schools. I think that's the best chance for success. And there's a lot of things in the political climate that are just different now, which is going to make it more difficult than it's ever been. So, but again, I think you can build those relationships with your community and identifying the right priorities by listening to your community and letting them identify them to where it is an opportunity. While it's additional taxes for the community, I think there's, again, ways that you can tie it to a good investment and where the students actually achieve the outcomes that those dollars were intended to achieve. So
this is also a good opportunity for us to bring the community to kind of rally around a common vision of how, this common thread that ties and bring communities that feels they have not been part of a lot of decision making. There are a lot of, our community is divided right now, with no doubt about it. But this may be a chance for us to intentionally go reach out to different communities, even though they may start with different perspective, but start finding a way to engage them. Because we need to get them together before we can even have the conversation on dollars and cents. That's my hope, this may be a chance to repair some of the rift in our local community. So I hope we could do something like that as board members. We can reach out and listen intentionally before we start saying, okay, what do you have to share and how do we work together?
I don't know if I should ask. I just have a question. We can transition. I think there's a lot that's coming to my mind. I think you pointed out, Bob, also that it's an investment, right? And I think for some of us, it can be really hard because of what you said, Andrea, of like the dollar, right? Like, I mean, I feel my groceries are not $50 anymore. So it's definitely there, but to be able to think about the investment, and I'm thinking back to earlier in our conversation, we were thinking about a strategic plan and what is each and every one of our roles, right? Like, what is your role as a community member? You know, what is your role as a business partner? What is your, you know, so I think that these things tie together, but I think just to understand a little bit of the context, I know we heard through this last year also, I mean, we got public comment on like, let's do a levy and why haven't we done this? And, you know, Satya, you brought up the state property in the community, but can you help me fill in the gap? Like, have we had a levy in the district before? And if not, like, is there a particular reason? Or is it just like the need hasn't been as prominent as it feels now? I think that's just something that I don't quite understand, but also might need to be part of the story, because people will wonder, like, well, we've been fine without, or why haven't, you know, we haven't had it, and like, why now? So,
based on my historical knowledge and in talking with other people, Salem-Keizer has never gone out for a levy, a local option levy. And as far as why, I can't answer why. What I can say is, in comparison to what other districts have done, there's other things that the district could take advantage of. That, you know, there is a construction excise tax, and the school district and previous boards decided not to take action on that when it was first authorized. So there's a lot of a culture or decision in Salem, probably in relation to the state property, in that, you know, any new tax has a much higher burden on our local taxpayers just because of the reduced amount of property out there. That means each property owner has to bear a larger portion of that tax. So my guess is we protected the bonding capacity of the school district in lieu of that. And previously, the Measure 5, Measure 50 gap that you've probably heard about for Salem-Keizer, because of the state, because of repressed property values in this area, there was not enough taxing capacity for Salem-Keizer to really take advantage of a local option tax as well.
I think that last point is especially true. It's been the changes in property value over the last 10 years that I think is, amongst other factors, even made this worthy of 45 minutes of retreat discussion. Prior to that, it might have been true that there just wasn't enough space to consider a levy that would have a dollar value enough to even justify the effort.
But our bond was the largest bond in the state of Oregon. So we did have something, not exactly levy, but we did have pass a bond, which turned out to be the, thank you, Lisa, for all your work, which became the largest bond. So our community has definitely supported it historically. What year was that?
almost 10 years ago.
Oh, 10 years.
2018.
2018. How can I forget? It was like, I don't know. When was it?
You would have started in 2016.
I know.
So that will go on for 20 more years. The bond will, whatever people are paying towards the bond will go on for another 20 years.
Sorry, I didn't.
Is it a 30-year bond? So for 20 more years, we'll have to, each family will pay whatever they're paying towards the bond.
Well, I think if, and I'm no expert by any stretch, but what Andrea was mentioning, like there are pieces of the bond that fall off, they mature, and then they come back on. So it's not as easy as an answer. And that's my layman's way of answering that question. Not that it was directed at me, but.
Okay, Bob? Any closure? Any other questions?
I will make one closing comment on this. Again, this is just to kind of orient ourselves. What is this thing even? But Bob, could you go back to the slide that's got the map on it? One of the things that we can see in this map is that the density of use is highly concentrated in the Willamette Valley. And if I even look at the 10 largest districts, half of them are significantly augmented with a local option levy. So what I believe is inadvertently but cumulatively true is that this is a part of the fabric of school funding in Oregon. And it is hard for communities like ours to keep pace because we do not have the same property wealth of Beaverton or Portland. But it still really matters to our kids. And the longer we don't have it, the more we are at a competitive disadvantage in every form. Portland can pay more for their staff, but we're competing in the same labor market. Portland has more capacity, Beaverton has more capacity, but we're being judged against the same standards. We're gonna feel it this year. I will say every member of the executive team is already feeling the administrative reductions. Everyone in this room is carrying more than they carried last year because there are fewer people to do the work. And that is gonna be true in schools too. I think that as much as anything over the course of bargaining and over the course of the reductions, we heard about class size. I do not believe there will be money coming from the state at a level sufficient to really tackle class size. I will be delighted if what we get is enough to keep pace with the rate of our expense growth, which is all that was ever supposed to do. It wasn't, that calculation method is not supposed to reduce class size. If we can keep pace, that would be great. Local option levy funding is the only avenue I see to true class size reduction. And even that, it won't be system-wide. Even if we had it, we can do a lot of good. We can get class sizes lower. I don't know that we could get every one of Sophia's class sizes lower, but you would have the ability to choose where it matters most. And I think that our staff would feel that their needs were heard. And if our staff feel that way, our community will feel that way too. So there is, I guess that's a long speech to say, Satya, I feel that same draw that you do, that we have a chance to work together towards outcomes, which was the whole first half of our retreat. But if we had a chance to work on context too, circumstance, the factors that make those outcomes possible, it could be a powerful binding force.
If we pass the levy and we get
Satya.
some money,
Satya.
will the state take away our money? Sorry, I didn't.
If I heard your question correctly, the local option levy revenue does not count
Okay.
towards
Fine.
state school fund revenues up to a certain limit.
Okay,
But like I said, Salem-Keizer would not reach that limit.
sorry.
Ashley?
I'm not sure we covered this, but isn't there also some like matching fund for local districts? Is that something you can speak to? Because that always seems to get, I know like in the donor world, when you have a match that you're putting out there, that can be really good incentive for taxpayers to feel like they're maximizing their contribution.
Yeah, so the state does have a program. It's called the Local Option Equalization Grant Program, and it's essentially designed to create equity among different regions with that have different property values. So with that grant, if any school district, but if Salem-Keizer was able to pass a local option levy, there would be a certain amount of money that we could be eligible for from the state. But that's a calculation that's done once the levy is passed.
Satya, I think that as much as anything, I think that provision for the state match addresses your comment about the state-owned property, because our eligibility for that match is largely a function of how much of our community's property is exempt from taxation. And so, in a way, it is actually an existing provision to address a revenue issue that is not of our making.
It's a great way to get state to pony out some money to us.
So we don't have sorry, and just to go back, there's no specific percentage per se, like, because I think to your point, Ashley, right, it's helpful if we can say, hey, for every dollar, there's X, but we don't know what that would be until passed.
So it's based on a formula. Everything in the state is based on a formula, but they select a target district and set that as kind of the assessed value per ADMW, and then they rank every school district in the state. And depending on where you rank in that district, if you're below the target district on a assessed value per ADMW, then the grant makes up the difference to the target district. So if a target district was $500 per ADMW, and then your district was $200 per ADMW, then the state would kick in $300 per ADMW.
So if we, in an obviously hypothetical world, had a local option levy last year, if we had that revenue, I think we calculated it to be an estimated about 70% match. Is that right, Bob?
Yes.
So 70 state cents on every $1 of local revenue. So it's not an insignificant matching provision as it currently exists in state law.
Oh, that's a good money.
That's
Like it.
It's a good money.
I believe we have our slogan.
That's a good money. Good money.
Anything for shakedown from state is, I love it.
All right. At this time, we have a presentation. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to take a couple minutes here to recognize our prior chair with a little token of gratitude. I know a number of us have been chair. It's a huge commitment, time, energy, emotion, going through the ups and downs of last year. Just want to say thank you. You led with grace and positivity, and we're really a great model for how a chair should be, and how I know we have an amazing next chair, and I just really appreciate you and your leadership style. So
Thank you.
you can open it on camera. You can use it. Use it if this chair will delegate to you to close the meeting.
Ashley, we want to thank you for taking care of this. And Karina, you did an outstanding job.
I get mine.
You get your own. You get your own gavel, and you'll get to use it today because we're going to allow you to close out the meeting in a minute. First of all, I just want to thank our superintendent and our leadership team for all of the work you've done to prepare to help us in our learning. Without this information, we can't make the decisions that we need to make. This has been very, very helpful today. Very, very helpful. It was worth getting up on a Saturday morning and being here at 8 o'clock. Just thank you. And I want to thank my fellow board members for all being here today and just being your great selves and asking the questions we need to ask and bringing us forward to face all of the different things, the challenges and the questions and everything that we'll need to face in these next few days. School's about to start. Yes. If there are no other questions or any comments that need to be made, I think we need to let Karina use her new gavel.
Oh, wow.
Well, if I can just say, I just want to say again, thanks like Sophia, Jonathan, Danielle for joining us. It was
Yes.
kind of our first, like all of us in this space, so I'm excited for this year ahead. What time is it? 11:49, adjourned.